Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. Case 1. On August 17th, police in Los Angeles, United States received a call from a man named Peng. Speaking in a panicked tone, he reported that his girlfriend and son showed no signs of life. Upon receiving the report, the police quickly arrived at the location provided by Peng. There, they confirmed that both individuals were deceased and immediately called in the forensic team. While forensic personnel were examining the scene and some investigators were assessing the surroundings, an officer took Peng's statement on site. According to Peng, while at Kai Tak Airport in Hong Kong, he had called his girlfriend Ji in Los Angeles to inform her that he was flying to the United States to visit her. Peng shared that 5 months earlier, Ji had given birth to his child, so this time, he was traveling to the United States to visit both her and their son. During the phone call, Ji said she would bring their son to the airport to pick him up. However, when Peng arrived in Los Angeles, he saw no sign of his girlfriend. He waited for a while, but no one showed up, so he took a taxi to her apartment. Upon arriving at the apartment complex, Peng noticed Ji's red Honda parked in the garage, leading him to believe that she was and had simply forgotten to pick him up. Peng then went straight to his girlfriend's apartment, but the door was closed. He knocked for a while, but no one answered, so he went to the building management to request a key, claiming to be Ji's husband. However, the building management checked and found that Peng was not listed among Ji's emergency contacts, so they denied his request. As a result, he had no choice but to wait outside the apartment. By midnight, Ji had still not returned home. Peng pushed against the door and discovered that it was not locked, but merely shut. He quickly entered his girlfriend's home and was horrified to find her lying on the floor with visible injuries. At that moment, Ji was wearing a black and white polka dot dress. Without hesitation, Peng searched for their son, only to find him lying under a blanket. He immediately called the police. After gathering Peng's initial statement, the police continued investigating the scene. The forensic team also conducted examinations and confirmed that Ji and her son had passed away. In particular, upon examining Ji's condition, forensic experts assessed that the perpetrator likely harbored a deep grudge against her. Considering the estimated time of death for the two victims, flight records, and CCTV footage from Ji's apartment building, police determined that Peng did not have enough time to commit the crime. As a result, he was ruled out as a suspect. At the scene, police found no footprints, fingerprints, or sharp objects. This heightened the pressure on investigators, as the case was not a simple one but involved two nations, the United States and China. Wasting no time, based on the information provided by Peng, the police sought assistance from the Chinese embassy in the United States to contact Ji's family. Upon hearing the news of their daughter's murder, Ji's parents were utterly shocked. Moreover, they were also surprised to learn that their daughter had a son. When meeting Ji's parents, Peng stated that he would cover all funeral expenses for his girlfriend and son. However, what they truly wanted was for the police to bring the perpetrator to justice. Who was the perpetrator, and why did they show no mercy even to Ji's son? Investigators raised many suspicions, and began by thoroughly looking into Ji herself. They were surprised by her relationship with Peng. Ji was born in October 1967 in Qingdao, Shandong Province. Her father was a construction engineer, and her mother was a doctor. She had an older sister and a younger sister. Coming from an educated family and raised well by her parents, Ji was cheerful, confident, and well-liked from a young age. She was also a diligent person. At the age of 18, Ji was admitted to the chemistry department of a prestigious university, demonstrating her intelligence and talent. Particularly, thanks to her outstanding academic achievements, Ji received scholarships every year. Additionally, she was 1.72 meters tall, had delicate facial features, and fair skin, earning her the title of a goddess of her school. Not only was she educated and beautiful, but Ji was also highly skilled in sports, especially volleyball. She even represented her university in various competitions. After graduating from university and passing several rigorous interviews, in 1985, Ji was hired to work at the renowned Weiquan Dynasty Hotel in Qingdao. There, Ji worked diligently, and her abilities were recognized by colleagues. She was quickly promoted to secretary for the general manager with a monthly salary exceeding 400 yuan. At the time, such a salary was considered high, equivalent to a programmer, earning 30,000 yuan per month today. Ji's parents were pleased, but they still felt that working in a hotel would not provide long-term stability for their daughter. However, Ji paid no heed and continued working there. Ji enjoyed her job at the hotel, as it gave her opportunities to meet and interact with influential people. Among them was a wealthy man from Taiwan, Peng. In her second year of employment, Ji met Peng, a Taiwanese millionaire. He was born in Tainan and was 24 years older than Ji at the time. Peng was the owner of Taiwan's largest electronic communication equipment company at the time. His business spanned over a dozen countries worldwide. In China, Peng's company also had branches in Qingdao, Shanghai, Guangzhou, Zhuhai, and many other locations. At that time, his company was valued at $200 million. During a business trip to Qingdao, where he was also staying at the Weiquan Dynasty Hotel, Peng met Ji. At the time, Ji was just a young woman in her early 20s, with a significant age gap, as well as stark differences in social status and background between them. However, Peng was unconcerned about these disparities and sought to get closer to the beautiful woman. He frequently found excuses to meet Ji, and over time, she developed feelings for the successful businessman. Sometime later, Ji left her job in Qingdao and moved to Shanghai. Peng hired her into his company as his assistant and secretary. Furthermore, Peng paid a high price to rent a luxurious apartment for Ji in Shanghai. Whenever they had free time, they would meet and spend time together. As their love deepened, even though they were not married, Ji gave birth to a son for Peng. She gave birth in the United States, yet their relationship remained unchanged. However, what shocked the police was that, upon investigation, they discovered that Ji was not Peng's girlfriend, but in fact his mistress. The man was already married. In particular, during their investigation into Peng's wife, the police uncovered surprising clues. What were they? Peng's wife was Lin. All assets, stocks, and everything else in the company were under both their names. More importantly, Peng's company had grown to such a vast scale thanks to the joint efforts of both him and his wife. They also had 2 sons who were studying abroad in the United States. During the investigation, the police discovered that Peng's wife was aware of her husband's relationship with Ji, and had even met his mistress before. One day, Lin noticed that their household phone bill had suddenly increased significantly over the past few months, especially after her husband's business trips to Shanghai. At first, Lin assumed these were work-related calls, but upon checking, she found that all the numbers her husband had dialed belonged to a single landline. How could a business collaboration be so extensive that it required calls lasting for months? Sensing something was wrong, Lin decided to investigate further. Eventually, through revelations from Peng's employees and evidence gathered from his belongings, Lin discovered that her husband was having an affair. Previously, whenever Peng returned home, his clothes often had lipstick stains left by another woman. When Lin questioned him, he always made up various excuses to cover up the truth. Finally, when Lin presented the evidence, Peng confessed to his wife about what he had done. He also promised that he would no longer contact Ji. After that, Ji returned to Qingdao to work. Did Peng truly listen to his wife and stop contacting Ji? Of course not. The two resumed their communication not long afterward. Upon discovering that her husband was still in touch with his mistress, Lin was furious. She flew to Qingdao, went to Ji's workplace, and publicly berated her husband's lover. By that time, all of Ji's colleagues knew about her affair in Shanghai. Overwhelmed with shame, she decided to have a direct conversation with Peng. However, to Peng, Lin was not just his wife, but also his business partner. He admitted that he truly loved Ji, but could not leave his wife and children. After careful consideration, Peng decided to send Ji to the United States, so she could continue her studies and enjoy life there. Ji agreed and moved into Peng's villa in Los Angeles, which was jointly owned by him and his wife. However, sometime later, Lin called the phone and Ji answered. This enraged her as she realized that her husband's mistress was living in a property she legally co-owned. Lin immediately flew to the United States and threw away all of Ji's belongings from her wardrobe. A heated argument broke out between the two women, escalating into a physical confrontation. Amid the chaos, Peng appeared and tried to intervene. Peng's act of protecting his mistress made Lin even angrier. However, she declared that she never wanted to see Ji again. Although Lin and Ji had a tense relationship, there was no concrete evidence to suggest she was involved in the case. Therefore, the police continued searching for clues. Eventually, they received the forensic examination results. During the previous autopsy, forensic experts discovered a bite mark on G's arm and had collected a saliva sample from the wound. However, upon analysis, they confirmed that the saliva did not belong to G, ruling out the possibility that she had bitten herself due to itching or pain. Sometime later, when the police learned about G and Lin's past conflict, forensic experts compared the collected saliva sample with Lin's saliva, which Peng had helped them obtain. The results showed a perfect match. There was only one explanation for this. Lin had met G at the time of the incident. The police identified Lin as the suspect. Notably, at the time of the crime, Lin was in the United States, residing in her private home, which was just over 4 kilometers away from G's residence. Based on the evidence and clues gathered, the police decided to take Lin's statement. However, they encountered another challenge. The crime took place in the United States, but both the victim and the suspect were Chinese nationals. How could authorities summon Lin? After careful deliberation, they found a solution and contacted Peng, asking him to bring his wife to the United States to cooperate with the investigation. Upon receiving this news, Peng agreed to the police's request. He found a reason to bring his wife back to the United States, and then took her to the police station, catching her completely off guard. There, the police once again took a DNA sample from Lin to compare with the DNA found in the saliva sample. Ultimately, they confirmed that she was the suspect. However, what surprised many was that upon being detained, Lin quickly admitted to her actions. She stated that G had provoked her over the phone, and she could not endure it, leading to this outcome. Lin recounted the entire incident, shocking the investigators, and even Peng himself could not believe that his wife was capable of such actions. According to Lin's testimony, in June 1992, G became pregnant. To conceal this, she gave birth in the United States and lied to her parents, claiming she was going there to study. However, after becoming pregnant, G developed the thought of becoming Peng's legal wife. Influenced by traditional Chinese values, she was determined to push for this goal as soon as possible. After the child was born, Peng continued to visit G whenever he had free time. If he couldn't, he would frequently call to check on her and the baby. These actions led Lin to discover that her husband had a child with his mistress. When Lin called G, feeling confident because she had given birth to a son, spoke with an air of superiority. She even mentioned that her villa was by the beach, had a swimming pool, and most importantly, that she had given Peng a son. Lin worried about whether this would affect her children's inheritance rights. Under such circumstances, she devised a terrifying plan. On August 17, 1993, Lin arrived in the United States and called G, saying she wanted to meet and talk, but did not know where she lived. To gain G's trust, Lin lied, claiming that she would voluntarily withdraw from the 3-person entanglement so that Peng could fully devote himself to G. Unexpectedly, G truly believed her words. She provided her address without realizing that this action would lead to disastrous consequences. Lin knocked on the door. As soon as G opened it, Lin immediately executed her plan. In a fit of rage, she bit G's arm, leaving a clear mark. Lin then proceeded with her plan against G's child. After succeeding, she quietly left, acting as if she had never been there. Lin deliberately moved in areas where the building's security cameras could not capture her, which is why the police did not find any footage of her when reviewing the recorded videos. With Lin's confession and the evidence collected by the police, she was officially indicted and brought to trial. In 1995, Lin's trial officially took place. A jury of 12 members listened to the evidence presented by both the prosecution and the defense. In the very first trial, Lin changed her testimony and denied committing the crime. However, the court found her guilty of double murder and sentenced her to life imprisonment without parole. Lin disagreed with this verdict, arguing that the police's evidence collection was illegal and inadmissible, leading to the exclusion of her recorded confession. In the second trial, the jury determined that Peng was also involved in the case. They believed that he feared G and their child would jeopardize his life and career, which may have led him to support his wife's actions. After multiple trials, a few months later, Lin admitted to her actions. However, she refused to acknowledge it as first-degree or second-degree murder, insisting that it was manslaughter because she was not in a clear state of mind after hearing G's taunts. Before the court delivered its final verdict, the judge received over 400 letters, many of which pleaded for leniency for Lin, including one from Peng. The letter stated that he felt obligated to speak on behalf of his poor, unfortunate wife. Peng claimed that after over 20 years of marriage, he knew she was a kind-hearted woman and firmly believed in her innocence. Before the sentencing, Lin called herself a poor and unfortunate woman abandoned by God. She expressed sorrow over not being able to be a good mother. The trials continued until 2001, when the final verdict was reached. Lin was sentenced to 11 years in prison and would be deported after serving her sentence. However, since Lin was not an American citizen, and considering her good behavior in prison, she ultimately served only 7 years. This case sparked significant social reactions at the time. Some sympathized with Lin, believing that her happy family had been destroyed by Ji's sudden appearance. However, another group of netizens argued that although Ji was the third party, she did not deserve such a fate. Disregarding human life is absolutely unacceptable. Some even felt that Ji had been deceived by Peng because in reality, he never transferred any assets into her name. This indicated that Peng had never truly trusted or been serious about his relationship with Ji, despite her giving birth to his son. If Peng had divorced Lin, the market value of his company and their other assets would have been affected. As a businessman, how could he do such a thing? Perhaps, in the end, the person who should feel the most guilt is this man. Although the case ultimately concluded in this manner, many unanswered questions remained, such as whether Lin's eldest son was involved in the incident. The reason many people suspected this was that Lin was petite, in stark contrast to Ji, who was athletic and had a tall stature. Many found it difficult to believe that Lin could have carried out the entire plan alone. However, no further investigation was ever conducted. Currently, Peng has also disappeared from the business world. No one knows where he is or who he is living with, but perhaps he will have to live with regret for the rest of his life. This was the case that shocked public opinion in the United States, China, and Taiwan for many years, which we wanted to share with you. Case 2. On the morning of November 6, 2009, a man from Kita, Hiroshima Province, Japan, took a basket and went up the mountain to pick wild mushrooms. When he reached a hillside near a cliff, he spotted a large mushroom, partially covered by dry leaves. The man rushed over, grabbed the mushroom stem, and prepared to pull it out when he suddenly noticed something horrifying next to the mushroom. Terrified, the man quickly backed away and frantically ran down the mountain, fumbling for his phone to call the police. "I found a human head," the man shouted into the phone, repeating the phrase several times. Just a few minutes later, several police cars arrived at the scene and cordoned off the mountain to investigate. Following the man's directions, they found a severed head with shoulder-length hair, a bruised face, and a shoe print on the left cheek. Due to severe decomposition, the police could not identify the victim. Recognizing the brutality of the case, the police mobilized an additional 300 personnel to search the surrounding mountain area. Since the mountain range was located on the border between Shermaine and Hiroshima, police from both prefectures joined forces for a joint investigation. The next day, November 7th, they discovered another body part on the slope below the cliff. On November 8th, the police found yet another part, believed to belong to the same person, all in a horrifying state. After piecing the found parts together, the forensic doctor confirmed that the victim was a young woman, and the injuries were inflicted post-mortem. The estimated time of death was between October 26th and October 31st. On November 9th, authorities found another body part, suggesting that the killer had scattered the victim's remains in the forest to avoid detection. The final discovery occurred on November 19th, when police found pieces of flesh and fingernails. Some organs remained missing and were never recovered. Since no blood was found at the scene, authorities suspected that the victim had been killed elsewhere and then brought to the mountain to dispose of the body. Police from both prefectures reviewed missing person reports from both areas. Investigators from Shermaine discovered a missing person report matching the time of the crime. 19-year-old student Miyako Hiroka had been reported missing by her family on October 28th. After contacting Miyako's relatives to collect DNA samples, police confirmed that the dismembered parts found on the mountain belonged to the unfortunate student. The murder immediately shocked all of Japan, and numerous press agencies and local TV stations flocked to the scene to cover the story. At this point, a series of strange events began to occur, making the case even more mysterious. A TV station sent a reporter to the crime scene at night to report on the incident, adding to the eerie atmosphere. After returning to the station, the technical staff reviewed the footage and discovered a girl's voice repeatedly saying, "Why me?" Terrified, the station staff refused to return to the crime scene a second time. When this information was made public, the Japanese people believed that it was undoubtedly the voice of Miyako's ghost. However, more pragmatic individuals carefully analyzed the video and repeatedly listened to the supposed ghostly phrase, suggesting that people were mistaken. The phrase in the video was not "Why me?" but a similarly pronounced phrase, "That's bad," possibly a comment made by a female police officer at the scene, accidentally picked up by the TV station's microphone. This explanation seemed more reasonable to many, but some still disagreed with it. They argued that because Miyako had been murdered so brutally, her spirit could not rest and remained wandering around the mountain. It seemed that the believers in the supernatural theory were right, as later in the case, another unexplained phenomenon occurred, which will be revealed at the end of the video. For now, let's continue to explore the reasons behind Miyako's disappearance and her personal life, as these revelations make the case even more intriguing. Miyako Hiroka was from Kagawa Province. At the time of the incident, she was a first-year student at Sherman University. Friends described Miyako as a cute, cheerful, and hardworking girl who always achieved high grades in all subjects. She did not have a boyfriend and had no conflicts with her classmates. Since childhood, Miyako had dreamed of traveling the world, so when she learned about the opportunity to become an exchange student at the Russian Maritime University, she was thrilled. Being a thoughtful person, Miyako knew that studying abroad as an exchange student would undoubtedly cost her family extra money. To ease the financial burden on her parents, she decided to work part-time after classes to save up for tuition. Before long, she found a job at an ice cream shop about 2 kilometers over 1 mile away from the university, returning to campus after 9 p.m. when her shift ended. Usually, she could take the bus between the ice cream shop and the university, but to save money, Miyako chose to walk. She explained to a friend that the 1-mile distance wasn't too far and saw it as a way to stay fit. However, walking meant crossing a small deserted forest with no signs of life. On her way to the ice cream shop, it was still daytime, so nothing seemed scary. But after her shift, it was past 9 p.m. and the path through the dark forest became even more ominous. Fortunately, Miyako found another classmate who also worked part-time at a clothing store near the ice cream shop. Their work schedules nearly coincided, so they started walking together. Having a companion made her feel somewhat safer. However, those days didn't last long. Miyako's classmates soon found a new part-time job closer to the university, and no longer needed to walk through the dark forest. Thus, Miyako had to walk alone through the forest at night to return to her dorm. According to later accounts from her friends, Miyako Haruka once confided that she felt very scared whenever she had to cross that small forest after work. Although her friends advised her to take the bus back to campus, Miyako didn't listen, wanting to save more money. In mid-October of the same year, the weather turned colder, and she told her friends that she planned to work at the ice cream shop only until the end of the month, then find a part-time job closer to campus. However, tragedy struck before she could change jobs. At around 9 p.m. on October 26th, Miyako finished her shift at the ice cream shop as usual and left the store. According to the ice cream shop staff, when she left she was carrying a trash bag, saying she would dispose of it on her way back. The police later retrieved security camera footage and found that she did indeed enter the path leading into the forest with the trash bag, but she never came out. None of the cameras along the surrounding streets recorded any trace of her afterward. The first person to notice Miyako's disappearance was the ice cream shop owner. The next afternoon, on October 27th, the owner noticed that she did not show up for work as usual. Since the owner only had her parents' phone number, they called to ask why Miyako didn't come to work. As soon as her parents received the call, they felt something was wrong, because Miyako usually called them at least twice a day. Since the evening of the 26th, they hadn't heard from her, and when they tried calling back, they couldn't reach her. Assuming her phone had run out of battery, her parents didn't think much of it until they received the call from the ice cream shop owner. They immediately contacted the dormitory manager, who informed them that Miyako had not returned to her room since the evening of the 26th. Her friends assumed she might have gone home, so they didn't report her absence. Sensing something was seriously wrong, her parents traveled from Kagawa to Sherman to investigate. After confirming that their daughter was missing and unreachable, they reported her disappearance to the police on October 28th. After receiving the missing person report, the police continued their investigation, but since they couldn't confirm that Miyako had been murdered, the progress was slow. It wasn't until the man discovered the horrifying scene on November 6th, 11 days after Miyako's disappearance, that her case turned into a shocking murder investigation. Determining that this was a high-priority case that needed to be solved immediately to avoid public panic, the police focused on the small forest where Miyako disappeared. It was highly likely that she was stalked and subdued by the perpetrator right in the forest, and then taken away by car. According to some students, a strange car had been seen near the university campus, with the driver frequently trying to approach female students. The police also checked security footage from her workplace and discovered a white Toyota parked near the employee entrance. The footage did not show anyone getting into the car, but a shopping center employee mentioned seeing a young woman getting into it. However, the witness could not clearly see the license plate or identify who was inside the car. Due to the darkness and the lack of additional surveillance cameras, the police could not determine which direction the car had gone. Based on the collected clues, the Scientific Investigation Unit of the police agency created a profile of the suspect. The place where the victim was found, Mount Garyu, was only 25 kilometers, nearly 15 miles from Hamada, and about a 50-minute drive. Since the white Toyota had been spotted at both the university and the shopping center, the police concluded that the perpetrator likely lived nearby and was familiar with Miyako's routine. Moreover, since Mount Garyu was a local tourist spot, it was likely that the perpetrator disposed of the victim's remains at night to avoid being seen. They speculated that the suspect probably lived alone and was between 20 and 40 years old, as handling the victim would have required significant physical strength. Despite sketching out these details, finding the perpetrator was not easy. The police checked all traffic cameras along the route and even used license plate recognition software, but found no results. After some time investigating, the police almost ruled out the possibility that the perpetrator was someone familiar. They concluded that this was likely a random crime targeting Miyako by a stranger. Therefore, an investigative team conducted interrogations with local hunters, surgeons, and the victim's lecturers. Customers of local video rental shops, especially those who bought horror movies, were also investigated. They also visited all meat shops to question recent customers who had purchased sharp knives. The police also searched abandoned houses near the crime scene for clues, but found nothing. As the case dragged on without being solved, causing severe impacts, local residents and students became extremely anxious, continuously urging the police to solve the case quickly. However, the police had no leads whatsoever and could only increase patrols and remind people to stay safe. Chimain University, where the victim studied, even issued a notice requiring students and lecturers not to walk alone at night. At the same time, the dormitory curfew was moved earlier from midnight to 10 p.m. However, as long as the perpetrator remained at large, the fear in everyone's hearts could not be dispelled. Meanwhile, mixed rumors began to spread, and the Miyako Haruka case gradually became fabricated into a terrifying legend. At this point, the pressure on the police grew increasingly intense, but despite their efforts, they were still unable to make any breakthroughs in the investigation. At the end of February 2010, the police began distributing flyers, posters, and information sheets, calling on the public to provide any information that could help the investigation. At the same time, the authorities offered a reward of 3 million yen, $20,000 for any clue leading to the suspect's arrest. By April 26, 2010, 11,000 flyers had been printed and distributed. Despite the influx of information, ultimately, all of it was confirmed to be worthless. As of September 2010, more than 60,000 investigators had participated in the case, and this number eventually soared to 310,000. However, even that was not enough. As the investigation remained at an impasse, the case remained unsolved, and not even the suspect's identity had been discovered. It was not until 2016 that the case made significant progress, by which time 7 years had already passed. In 2016, license plate recognition technology had advanced significantly, so the police decided to apply this technology to rescan old CCTV footage from the time the case occurred. They rescanned all license plates and reviewed those who had left Shermaine around the time of the incident. After some effort, the authorities discovered a white Toyota that had appeared near the forest. Records showed that this car traveled from Masuda to Hamada on October 26, 2009, and returned to Masuda on the 27th. The vehicle's travel time exactly matched the period when Miyako went missing and was later murdered. This was also the car that the victim's colleague had seen parked outside the shopping center. Upon investigation, the police found that the car's owner was Yashaharu Yano, 33 years old. The police immediately began looking into this man. Yashaharu was from Shimonoseki City, Yamaguchi Province. His family was well off. His father ran a rice shop, his mother owned a laundry, and Yashaharu also had a younger brother. Yashaharu had an excellent academic record and was considered a model child in the eyes of the neighbors. Classmates described Yashaharu as serious and quite reserved, and he also held a black belt in judo. Thanks to his outstanding athletic achievements at school, he was invited to join the Japan Self-Defense Forces, but Yashaharu declined to study engineering at a university in Fukuoka. He was also a drummer in a band, but the group disbanded due to internal conflicts. Yashaharu once confided to friends that he suffered from focal dystonia in his left hand, which ended his hopes of pursuing a music career. Feeling frustrated, he dropped out of university, despite his parents and teachers trying to convince him otherwise. In 2001, he attacked a stranger, but the woman managed to escape. Fearing arrest, Yashaharu fled to Tokyo and took up manual labor jobs to make a living. There, he remained obsessed with women and continued stalking potential victims. In 2004, he attempted to assault a woman in Sujinami Ward, using a knife to restrain her. The victim resisted, sustaining only minor injuries, and managed to escape. Undeterred, just 15 minutes later, Yashaharu approached another woman, but she also fought back and escaped. Both victims reported to the police, and Yashaharu was arrested and sentenced to 3 years and 6 months in prison. He was released in 2008, but failing to find a job in Tokyo, he returned to his hometown of Shimonoseki, Yamaguchi, and worked as a salesman. Despite his quiet demeanor, Yashaharu was an excellent employee, securing many valuable contracts. His achievements were praised by his superiors, who transferred him to Masuda, Shirmane Prefecture, to manage a branch office. The police discovered that the branch office of Yashaharu's company was very close to the ice cream shop where Miyako worked. By this point, the police were 50% certain that Yashaharu Yano was connected to the 2009 case, so they decided to delve deeper into his personal life. Friends said that despite his success, Yashaharu still isolated himself from others. He lacked the confidence to approach women, instead posting on dating sites, but unfortunately receiving no responses. When checking his social media activity, they found that on September 12, 2009, Yashaharu posted a photo of beef at a supermarket with the caption "cow carcass." He also shared scenes from his favorite movies, which were extremely gruesome. Colleagues also mentioned that Yashaharu frequently complained about life and was almost always in a state of tension. However, what made the police most suspicious was his behavior before and after Miyako's murder. On October 27th, he met with his boss to request leave and told a colleague that he had done something terrible. On November 6th, Yashaharu requested additional leave for November 7th and 8th to return to his hometown with his family to visit his father's grave. This was when the police discovered the shocking and eerie twist in the case. Yashaharu had died in a traffic accident just 2 days after the police found Miyako's body. On November 8th, 2009, rescue teams in Mine, Yamaguchi received a report about a traffic accident on the highway. A white Toyota crashed into the guardrail and burst into flames. When rescue forces arrived, they found the car burned to the frame, with 2 people dead inside. Based on scattered documents on the road and DNA testing, the police confirmed that the victims were Yashaharu Yano and his mother. According to witnesses, for some reason, the car Yashaharu was driving continuously scraped against the roadside guardrail. The front hood quickly emitted white smoke, and not long after the car stopped, it caught fire. However, no one inside the car tried to escape. Why didn't they get out? Were they trapped or unconscious? Investigators at the time were completely baffled. They also found that from the moment the car started scraping the guardrail to when it came to a complete stop, there were no signs of sudden braking. Normally, such an accident would attract significant attention, but at that time, the Miyako murder case was making headlines, so no one paid much attention to the accident. The police believed that while driving, Yashaharu might have heard news of the case on the radio, possibly out of fear and unwillingness to face justice. He deliberately caused the accident as an act of suicide. It is also likely that he rendered his mother unconscious so she could not escape, then chose to die with her in the car. However, All of this was just police speculation. Although the police had identified the car owner as Yashaharu and gathered many clues suggesting he could be the suspect in Miyako's murder case, they wanted to be more certain. To that end, the police went to his hometown to investigate further. At that time, Yashaharu's younger brother was still living in the family's old house. When he learned the reason for the police visit, he handed over some of his brother's belongings, including a camera. Even though the camera was damaged by the fire and most of the photos had been deleted, the police managed to recover more than 57 images. These images ultimately dispelled any remaining doubts about Yashaharu's crime. He was indeed the perpetrator in Miyako's case. These horrifying photos, taken on October 27, 2009, documented the entire process of the victim being murdered. After confirming Yashaharu as the culprit, the police announced this to the public at the end of 2016. Miyako's family could finally close the case after 7 long years, but Yashaharu's younger brother faced a different reality. When Yashaharu's cruel actions were made public, his brother had to endure the pain of being ostracized and shunned by neighbors and public opinion. Moreover, his and his wife's business went bankrupt, forcing them to move elsewhere. Since the perpetrator had died, the police could only hypothesize about what had happened. They believed that Miyako was abducted by Yashaharu on her way home from work, taken to his house in Masuda, and murdered there. Afterward, he processed the victim's body and disposed of it in the Garia mountain area. Even though Yashaharu had been dead for 7 years, the police still submitted the case file to the prosecutor's office on December 20, 2016, seeking prosecution. However, on January 31, 2017, the prosecutor decided not to prosecute, officially closing the case. Nevertheless, the public announcement of the investigation's conclusion did not eliminate the lingering doubts among the public. People began to show deep interest in Yashaharu's accident. Many agreed with the police, believing that he might have deliberately caused the accident out of fear of his crime being exposed. However, some speculated that his accident might have had a spiritual aspect, possibly being revenge from Miyako's spirit. Regardless of the theories, Miyako's case serves as a cautionary reminder for young women not to walk alone at night in isolated areas. Case 3. The true crime case that took place in Peru, Indiana, USA. As the clock approached midnight on August 3rd, the phone rang at the 911 dispatch center. A panicked woman's voice said, "It's my husband. There's blood on him." The dispatcher tried to calm the woman down and asked for the necessary information. Soon, phones were ringing off the hook in law offices and law enforcement agencies across Peru. The victim was Mr. James Grund, 47 years old, also known as Jimmy, a prominent lawyer and former Miami County prosecutor. This information immediately shocked the entire city, as the victim came from a distinguished and powerful family. Police officers who had previously attended parties at James's spacious, well-kept home now arrived there to investigate a murder scene. At the scene, James had been fatally shot through his left eye. While authorities carried out their work, Susan Grund remained in shock over what had happened. She claimed it seemed like her husband had been attacked unexpectedly by a burglar. Evidence included a ransacked bedroom, with items from 2 suitcases scattered all over the place. Their wardrobe had been rummaged through, and jewelry kept in a drawer was missing. However, clues at the scene made investigators suspect that the burglary theory seemed unlikely. When the police arrived, James's body was found on the sofa in front of the coffee table in the bedroom. This was where he would often work and watch TV. The table was still cluttered with bills, checks, record slips, and the remote control. It appeared that the victim had been working with the papers spread out in front of him, and he was still clutching a tissue in his hand. It seemed as if the intruder surprised the victim rather than frightened him. But why would he react that way to a burglar? Moreover, why would the burglar stalk and kill James instead of stealing valuables from the house? Forensic technicians from the Indiana State Police suspected that the disorder in the house seemed staged. After noticing the unusual details at the scene, investigators also observed the wife's strange behavior. While authorities were carefully examining the scene, Susan kept insisting that their house had been broken into. The provocatively dressed woman claimed that on the day of the incident, her husband had several appointments and came home late at night. Knowing her husband would be home late, she said she spent most of the day at her mother's house with her children. Police found it odd that Susan kept insisting there had been a burglary despite the crime scene details suggesting otherwise. When investigators began interviewing people, She acted strangely by reminding her relatives not to talk much to the police. However, they still went to the police station and gave statements, leading to some unexpected discoveries. Detectives learned that Susan's activities on the day her husband was murdered were quite different from what she had claimed. Susan had been going out repeatedly, and even returned home around 9:30 p.m. She told others that her husband was still in his study. Moreover, on the night of the incident, when her daughter tried to enter the room to wish her father good night, Susan stopped her and said that James had already gone to sleep. A while later, she entered the room, discovered her husband had been murdered, and called the police. With her extremely odd behavior, detectives immediately suspected the widow. Investigating the victim's marital relationship, detectives received surprising testimonies from the lawyer's friends. One friend revealed that James had bitterly complained to him about his marriage. The couple frequently argued both at home and in public, not about Susan's affairs, but about her extravagant spending habits. Clothes, jewelry, lingerie, cars, all the expensive things Susan spent money on made James feel trapped with a wife who didn't love him. Worse yet, James had come to a serious conclusion that he was merely a tool for his wife. He realized that Susan didn't love him at all, but was only attracted to the Grund family's reputation and status. Feeling abandoned and unloved, James decided to take action. In mid-July, he met with a fellow lawyer in Peru, requesting to start divorce proceedings. However, he decided to wait until Susan and her 2 children returned from their long vacation in Alaska before officially filing. During that trip, James informed Susan of his decision. The family returned to the city on August 1st, and just 2 days later, James was murdered. From these clues, police decided to investigate Susan and uncovered shocking revelations about the woman. Susan Grund was born as Sue Ann Sanders in 1958 in a poor rural area. Since childhood, Sue Ann had wanted to escape her background, so she changed her name to Susan, a name that didn't sound as countrified as Sue Ann. As she grew older, Susan became a beautiful, charming young woman with a radiant smile and a slender figure. To men, Susan was the ideal type for one-night stands rather than a wife. At 17, Susan dropped out of school and moved to the central city of Kokomo, Indiana, 20 miles away. There, she met a local rock and roll musician named Ronnie Lovell and quickly started dating him. The two married just weeks after meeting in 1975. Despite being married, Susan had unusual sexual desires and was willing to have affairs with other men. This woman seemed unable to control her own urges. One of her lovers was Gary Campbell, a 24-year-old cowboy who made a living as a truck driver. When her husband found out, she quickly divorced him and moved in with her lover. The two married in 1979. A few months after the wedding, she gave birth to a son for Gary, and they named the boy Jacob. However, this second marriage quickly followed the same disastrous path as the first. She freely went to bars, sought out men for dates, and even slept with multiple partners at once. Whenever she felt the urge, she would immediately find any man to satisfy her needs, regardless of where she was. If her desires peaked, the woman was willing to drag a man to a parking lot or some secluded corner to have sex. Discovering that his wife hadn't abandoned her promiscuous ways and was prone to sudden outbursts of anger, Gary decided to divorce her. Most friends knew Susan was a sex addict who frequently slept with men to fulfill her cravings. This woman seemed unable to live without men, even for a minute. Not long after divorcing her second husband, Susan met Tom Whited, a former Army captain with a college degree. Tom's wife had passed away from cancer, leaving him and his son Tommy in a spacious, beautiful home gifted by his father-in-law. Knowing Tom was wealthy and backed by his late wife's father, who supported one of the city's most successful businesses, Susan was determined not to miss this opportunity. Seeing Tom's interest in Susan, his father-in-law warned him that his wife had only been gone for 6 months, and that Susan was a divorced woman with a complicated past. But nothing could stop the two from being together, and Susan gained custody of Jacob after divorcing her second husband. At just 24 years old, she had already been married 3 times and had a new surname, Susan Sanders Lovell Campbell Whited. Since both of their sons were 3 years old, Susan would tell new neighbors they were twins rather than explaining their complicated family dynamics. A few months after Tom Whited married Susan, his son Tommy was admitted to an Oklahoma City hospital with a skull fracture and brain swelling. Tearfully, she explained to her husband that Tommy had fallen and hit his head while he was away. But Tommy told a different story. When a nurse asked him what had happened, he candidly replied, "Mom hit me." In a place like Oklahoma City, in 1983, child abuse was still often considered a family matter rather than a criminal offense. As a result, the nurse didn't report it to the police. Instead, it was treated as a private family issue. Consequently, Tommy was returned to Susan's care after spending a few days in the hospital. However, from that point on, friends of Tommy's late mother began to suspect Susan had done something to turn the once cheerful, energetic boy into a timid, fearful child after his father remarried. Tommy also once told his late mother's best friend that Susan had hit him on the head. The boy also revealed that while Jacob was allowed to move freely around the house all day, Susan forced him to sit in front of the TV and exercise along with the Richard Simmons show. 4 months later, in May 1983, Tommy returned to the hospital unconscious and suffering from a brain hemorrhage. Susan claimed that Tommy had fallen out of a stroller and hit his head on concrete. According to her, he was the clumsiest boy in America. However, this time, doctors didn't believe her story after discovering bruises on Tommy's head, body, and limbs, along with several cigarette burns. Police immediately charged Susan after her own son tearfully confessed that his mother frequently beat Tommy for no reason. Tommy suffered brain damage and was left bedridden due to the brain injury caused by his stepmother. However, this cruel stepmother was only sentenced to 5 years of probation, which outraged many people. Tommy's grandfather was furious and blamed his foolish son-in-law for failing to see the evil in his new wife. Tommy's care was entrusted to his grandfather, while Susan's son Jacob was placed under the custody of his biological father, her ex-husband. What angered people even more was that Tom still seemed infatuated with his wife, even after his son had been abused. A close friend revealed that after the incident, the couple continued to sleep together daily. This caused Tom to be scorned and shunned by all his family and friends. Only after facing public criticism and condemnation did he finally realize Susan's true nature and call her the biggest liar in the world. After divorcing Tom, Susan decided to return to her hometown in the city of Peru in the summer of 1984. At that time, she was 3 months pregnant with Tom Whitehead's daughter. Being in her 20s and highly attractive to men, Susan didn't consider pregnancy much of an issue. She continued meeting various men and sleeping with them to satisfy her desires. One night at a local bar, she happened to meet James Grund. The Grund family was a well-known name in the legal circles of Peru and Miami County. For generations, members of the Grund family had held prominent positions in the local legal system. James Grund himself was destined to follow the family's path, having studied law at Indiana University. James served as the county's top prosecutor for 4 years, from 1978 to 1982, when his father retired. In addition to his illustrious career, he also owned a bar in the city. He held a pilot's license and enjoyed fishing with friends in his spare time. After divorcing his wife, James continued living with her, partly for the sake of their children and partly for financial reasons. James started dating Susan in the summer of 1984 after meeting her at the bar. He found her beautiful and charming, unaware that she was pregnant. Seeing that James was wealthy and well-known, Susan immediately seduced him and lured him into her web of romance. Moreover, she didn't want to raise her child alone while being penniless. A few months after they met, Susan gave birth to a daughter named Tenelle, and she also regained custody of Jacob from her second husband. The couple later moved to Florida and got married on a beach. At the time, James was overwhelmed with happiness, feeling fortunate to have married a young, attractive wife. In the summer of 1986, James, Susan, and her 2 children moved into a luxurious mansion in the city of Peru, purchased at an extravagant price. James even opened a large fashion boutique for Susan in the city center. Susan seemed to have everything she wanted, a wealthy, upper-class lifestyle, far removed from her impoverished childhood. Yet that wasn't enough for her, as her insatiable desires flared up once again. After moving to her new home, Susan suddenly became the hostess of lavish barbecues and cocktail parties. She even participated in the Mrs. Indiana America beauty pageant in Indianapolis in 1989. As she entered her 30s, Susan still maintained her youthful and alluring appearance. With a slender figure, she confidently flaunted her body in revealing outfits from top fashion designers. Every time James went fishing or traveled for work, she never forgot to slip seductive photos of herself into his bag. But James wasn't the only one receiving those photos. As he aged, James's physical capabilities declined, and this was when Susan resumed her promiscuous lifestyle. With her flirtatious nature, this woman once again sought out new men to add to her collection of lovers. Before long, the entire city of Peru was buzzing with rumors about Susan's wild behavior. Susan openly shared details about her encounters with men with close friends, even her mother and sister. She didn't hide the number of lovers she had, which included an accountant, a handsome local police officer, and a devoted Baptist churchgoer. She even slept with some of her husband's friends and colleagues. Her flings took place at bars, during secretive nights at Indianapolis hotels, or in her sister's apartment in Kokomo. This woman wasn't shy about seducing even gay men, just to get the attention she constantly craved. Although James heard countless rumors about his wife, he merely shook his head and shrugged it off, knowing he couldn't meet her needs. No one could deny, however, that their marriage had begun to deteriorate. Over time, James spent more time with his fishing and drinking buddies. Little did he know, this gave Susan the freedom to pursue her string of lovers. Half the population of Peru, including police officers and prosecutors, knew about the couple's turbulent relationship. Meanwhile, half the men in the city had reportedly slept with Susan. From this, police began to suspect that Susan may have killed her husband because he couldn't satisfy her desires. However, the investigation faced difficulties from the start, due to a lack of concrete evidence, and things soon became more complicated. At the same time, James' son from his first marriage, David, revealed a crucial clue. When David learned that police had found a 9mm shell casing at the crime scene, he suddenly remembered something. On July 4th, something strange had happened. A 9mm pistol had been stolen from David's house. Coincidentally, that same afternoon, Susan had stopped by David's home and asked about the location of the gun. After returning from a fireworks display that night, David discovered that someone had broken into his house and taken only the pistol. He suddenly remembered that he had once fired that gun into a wooden post. Police later retrieved that bullet and compared it to the one found at James' murder scene. The results were shocking. The two bullets were a match. The 9mm pistol stolen from David's house was indeed the weapon used to kill his father. Immediately after the murder, Susan began the process of claiming her husband's $250,000 life insurance policy. She declared herself the executor of James' will, but this wasn't easy since James' two children, Jama and David, filed a petition to prevent her from doing so. James' children found an ally in the investigators working on the case, including Sergeant Gary Nichols, James' best friend. Nichols took it upon himself to ensure that Susan wouldn't receive a single cent from James' insurance policy. 3 months after the murder, on November 2nd, a chance encounter changed everything and helped police catch the killer. Darlene Wardens, Susan's sister, happened to run into Bob Brinson, the lead investigator on the case. After some hesitation, Darlene decided to share a story she had kept secret for a long time. The woman confessed that she had been burdened with guilt and felt the need to reveal the truth. Darlene revealed that on September 2nd, Susan had confided in her and their mother, Nellie Sanders, admitting that she had killed James. Susan also confessed that the murder weapon was a 9mm pistol, which she had hidden inside a Christmas teddy bear. The teddy bear had been stored with holiday decorations in the laundry room. Although shocked by the horrifying revelation, Darlene agreed to help her sister. The three women took the gun, placed it at the bottom of a metal pot, and then poured cement over it, creating a heavy concrete block. This pot was then stored at a nephew's house within the family. With this tip from Susan's sister, police rushed to the nephew's house to retrieve the pot containing the murder weapon. However, when they arrived, the pot was missing. Despite lacking the murder weapon, police proceeded to arrest Susan on November 4th. While the investigation continued, prosecutors prepared the case for trial, scheduled for the fall of 1993. About 10 weeks before the trial, Susan's mother, Nellie Sanders, walked into the police station and turned herself in. She admitted that she had hidden the pot in her attic, fearing it would fall into police hands. Overcome with guilt and fearing she would be charged as an accomplice, she decided to confess everything. Authorities quickly recovered the murder weapon exactly where she had described, making the case against Susan much stronger. Susan's trial began on September 27, 1993, drawing the attention of the entire city of Peru. The case shocked the community as numerous family secrets were exposed, playing a crucial role in unraveling the truth. The most shocking moments in the trial came from the testimonies of both the victims and the defendants' family members. When explaining why she hid the gun, Susan gave conflicting and confusing statements. She claimed that upon returning home the night of the murder, she discovered that James had been killed and immediately called the police. Seeing the gun on the floor, she recognized it as her stepson David's pistol. Fearing that David might be involved in the incident, she claimed she hid the gun inside the teddy bear. When questioned further, Susan sobbed and tearfully claimed that she was worried about David because the two of them had been having an affair for 2 years. This testimony caused an uproar in the courtroom. When it was David's turn to take the witness stand, he expressed disgust and completely denied his stepmother's accusations. He angrily declared, "I never had an affair with that woman." The complex relationship between the stepmother and her stepson further intensified the tension in the courtroom. Other family members of Susan, including her mother Nellie and sister Darlene, also harshly criticized her. Darlene, with a face full of anger, firmly stated that her sister was a compulsive liar who distorted everything. After 15 hours of intense deliberation, the jury failed to reach a conclusion because 2 members believed Susan was not guilty. However, a second trial held in March 1994 changed the outcome. Prosecutor Siders, taking cues from interviews with jurors, adjusted his strategy. He summoned 5 new witnesses, all of whom knew Susan through the victim. Each witness delivered the same clear message: she was a pathological liar. However, Susan's defense attorney argued that her relationship with David should not have been exploited further, as no one could provide evidence that the two had an affair. Nevertheless, Prosecutor Siders' strategy prevailed. On March 23, 1994, the jury found Susan guilty of murdering her husband. 3 weeks later, she was sentenced to 60 years in prison for her calculated, cold-blooded actions. Despite her conviction, Susan continued to insist on her innocence. Susan's 2 children, Jacob and Tennelle, were placed in the care of James' sister, Jane, and her husband, Fred Allen. After serving 15 years at the Indiana Women's Prison, Susan turned 50 in 2008. The woman is eligible for parole in 2025 when she turns 67. However, many believe Susan's chances of parole may face obstacles due to her stepson. In 1997, David completed his law degree and began practicing family law in Peru alongside his grandfather. Having once been falsely accused by his stepmother of both having an affair with her and murdering his father, David is unlikely to let her gain her freedom easily. The story of the woman who slept with half the men in town, murdered her husband, and falsely accused her stepson has now come to an end. /video. Case 4. In early 2014, British police stumbled upon one of the darkest corners of the internet, a dark website called Scream. This wasn't just a gathering place for perverts. It was a den of evil where thousands of criminals exchanged vile and disturbing content involving children. Recognizing the severity of the situation, the UK's National Crime Agency immediately partnered with the FBI to track down the site's operators and core members. But this was no easy task. The perpetrators were highly skilled at hiding, using sophisticated encryption layers that made tracing their footprints nearly impossible. Until April 2015, among thousands of horrific posts on the forum, one username stood out: 666devil. He wasn't just an active member, but also a terrifying manipulator. He boldly used a profile picture of an innocent little girl, with a chilling caption, "This is my daughter." But what shocked the police even more was his next message: "I'm planning Hell Week. Suggest what I should do to her." He was plotting to torture a child, and the police had to act before it was too late. A race against time began. The NCA urgently attempted to identify the little girl in the photo by tracing the email account linked to 666devil. The first clue emerged when a user with the same profile picture had posted an ad on the Gumtree website seeking to buy a special doll. The police later confirmed that this account belonged to the mother of the girl in the photo. The mother revealed that after her post, a woman claiming to be named Liz contacted her, offering to send a free doll. But this woman had an unusual request. "I want to be sure the doll reaches your daughter. Could you send me a photo of her holding a sign that says, 'I love SB'?" The mother, suspecting nothing, took a photo of her daughter in pajamas, holding the sign, and sent it. But the mother had no idea that SB stood for Scream, a forum filled with explicit content. A few days later, Liz continued demanding more pictures of the little girl. At this point, the mother felt uneasy and immediately reported the matter to Gumtree. However, after an investigation, the police discovered that Liz was merely a fake name, her IP address completely masked, and all traces vanished without a trace. Recognizing the extreme danger of this organization, in August 2015, an international task force involving the UK, the US, Israel, and Slovenia was formed to track down and expose those behind this dark website. Yet despite 2 years of relentless pursuit, the criminals remained elusive, expertly concealing their identities. In March 2017, the first breakthrough emerged. Intelligence agencies discovered a suspicious name linked to an address in Birmingham, England, Matthew Falder. On June 21, 2017, the police raided Falder's home on Harborne Road. During the search, they found 2 computers in his bedroom, but the most horrifying discovery was yet to come. Upon decrypting the devices, the police were stunned by what they uncovered: 14,000 explicit images and 1,251 child videos. These pieces of evidence confirmed that Falder was not just a member, but one of the most ruthless leaders of Scream. However, the police faced an even greater shock when they uncovered the true identity of this monster in disguise. Matthew Falder was not just an ordinary criminal. He was a distinguished geophysics Doctor of Philosophy holder, a respected lecturer at Cambridge University, one of the most prestigious institutions in the UK. Matthew Falder was born on October 24, 1988, in Manchester, England, into a wealthy and influential family. His father, Stephen Falder, was the head of HMG Paints, the largest independent paint manufacturer in the United Kingdom. Raised in luxury, Falder had everything any child could ever wish for: a privileged upbringing, elite education, and a bright future without having to endure any hardships. From an early age, Falder displayed the traits of a prodigy. He studied at King's School, one of the most prestigious private schools in Macclesfield, reserved for the most outstanding students. Falder wasn't just smart, he was among the top performers, consistently achieving perfect scores in science subjects. Thanks to his exceptional academic achievements, he easily secured a place at Cambridge University, one of the most prestigious institutions in the UK, renowned for producing some of the world's greatest minds. At Cambridge, Falder quickly established himself as an outstanding student. One professor even described him as one of the best students I have ever taught. Not only was Falder academically gifted, but he also cultivated an image of a confident, humorous, and charming young man. He knew how to make an impression with witty stories. To his friends and professors, Matthew Falder appeared completely harmless, a man with the persona of a friendly, likable genius. On social media, Falder frequently posted about his interests in dinosaurs, baking, table tennis, and 3D printing. He shared selfies, crossword puzzles, and even asked seemingly innocent questions like, how do I upload high-quality videos online? But no one knew that this was merely the surface of a nightmare that was gradually unfolding. It was at Cambridge that Falder's twisted behavior first emerged. Falder secretly installed hidden cameras in the bathroom of his shared house, recording private moments of his female housemates without their knowledge. He discreetly observed, filmed, and kept those videos as his twisted trophies. But that wasn't enough. Falder wanted more. On his 21st birthday, he rented a large vehicle to transport a group of friends from Cambridge to his family home. In the cheerful party atmosphere, no one suspected that the host of the event was a predator lurking in the shadows. While everyone else was busy having fun, drinking, and dancing, Falder quietly crept into dark corners, secretly taking inappropriate photos of the girls he had invited. However, that was only the beginning. Secret filming or covert surveillance wasn't enough to satisfy the twisted mind inside him. Falder wanted more. He wanted control. He wanted dominance. He wanted to turn innocent people into puppets in his hands. And thus, a sophisticated, ruthless scheme was born. With the mind of a genius, Falder created a fake identity named Liz, a gentle, trustworthy freelance artist. He lurked on social media platforms, searching for vulnerable victims. Platforms like Gumtree and Facebook became his ideal playground, where with just a fake account, he could begin his plan. Under the guise of Liz, he offered babysitting or pet care jobs with the promise of paying up to £4,000, a sum too tempting to refuse. But the only condition was they had to send nude photos, as he claimed to need material for artistic drawings. He persuaded his victims with sweet words, but that was just a perfect lie. Once the first photos were sent, Falder's mask fell. With his exceptional computer skills, he immediately tracked down the victims' real identities, their names, addresses, workplaces, schools, and even their relatives. And then, he unleashed an even more ruthless weapon: blackmail. The psychological torment began. The innocent victims fell into a desperate spiral, forced to send more photos, more explicit, more degrading. Young girls, thinking that satisfying him would make it all end, only to find that hell was just beginning. He pushed their humiliation to a new level, forcing them to take pictures holding signs that shamed themselves. Not stopping there, he even made them record videos performing unspeakably disgusting acts, just to satisfy his twisted desires. He forced them to pose beside pictures of Hitler, sing offensive songs, and perform acts beyond endurance, all just so he could witness their despair. But no matter how much the victims did, it was never enough. One young woman, in a desperate plea for release, sent him over 200 photos, hoping he would spare her. But Falder did not. Not only did he torture them, but he also spread those images to the darkest corners of the internet. One such platform was Hurt to the Core, a website infamous for being the most depraved and twisted to ever exist, a gathering place for demons in human form. On this website, users were ranked based on their brutality. The more disgusting content they uploaded, the more power they gained. And Falder, with his massive archive of photos and videos he had collected, quickly rose to the top. He was no longer just a blackmailer, he was a king in that twisted world. He edited, altered, and added humiliating captions to his victims' photos. He turned them into public entertainment, allowing other perverts to laugh and satisfy their sick desires. One victim, desperate to escape his control, sent him up to 500 photos, hoping it would end the torment. But his cruelty knew no bounds. He threatened to send those images to her mother in her school, forcing her to live in constant, overwhelming fear. Even more terrifying, Falder took screenshots of their conversations and uploaded them to Hurt to the Core, where other sick individuals delighted in her suffering. More horrifyingly, Falder manipulated a young father into secretly filming sensitive videos of his daughter and sharing them on the dark web. He also shared instructional videos on how to abuse children in disgusting and sick ways that would haunt anyone who heard them. In subsequent posts, he wrote about blackmailing victims into committing depraved acts, forcing them to tie themselves to trees, lock the ropes, and throw away the keys as a sick joke. The most disgusting is the category called Fun Games, which contains a series of unimaginably sick posts. Here, Falder suggests sick games to torture victims in extremely horrifying ways. Falder became increasingly notorious for his posts, and he also immersed himself in this fame. Falder created at least 70 different online identities, using aliases such as In the Garden, Evil Mind, and 666 Devil, each a new tool in his dark scheme. Falder's arrogance had convinced him that he was invulnerable, that his elaborate cover and ability to hide his identity on the dark web meant that no one could trace him. But he had no idea that, from his very first posts, he had been on the radar of law enforcement. The UK's National Cybersecurity Agency, in collaboration with the FBI and law enforcement agencies from several countries, had been doggedly tracking this predator. These were not hasty or imprecise moves. They were a planned hunt, quietly but relentlessly, tightening the siege around Falder. In April 2017, an undercover investigation by the National Crime Agency identified Falder as the prime suspect. For 3 months, agents followed his every move, quietly unraveling the mystery he had tried so hard to hide. Finally, one morning in June, as Falder was working in his office at the University of Birmingham, the door burst open. Plainclothes police officers stormed in. He had no chance of escape. When the horrific charges against him were read out, Falder showed no fear. He laughed, exclaiming in a mocking tone, "That sounds like a charge sheet from hell." Falder was taken into an interrogation room. For 3 days and nights, he stubbornly kept silent, refusing to comment, only smirking whenever the police mentioned his victims. But then, during his second interrogation, he made a mistake. When questioned about the Evil Mind account, Falder nodded and admitted everything. The subsequent investigation revealed a horrifying truth. Falder had haunted at least 60 to 180 victims over nearly a decade. Senior investigating officer Matt Sutton, who has worked at the NCA for more than 30 years, had to admit, "In my entire career, I have never seen an offender as terrifying." He also emphasized the unprecedented challenges that Falder's case presented, calling it one of the most complex investigations ever conducted. Regarding his motives, Sutton stated that Falder took pleasure in his cruelty. His main motivation was power and control. He wanted his victims to feel shame and humiliation. In addition to targeting victims on Gumtree, he also preyed on individuals through pro-anorexia websites. To achieve his goals, Falder posed as a teenage girl to obtain photos from 6 girls. Some victims reported that since their encounter with Falder, they had attempted to take their own lives multiple times. Others said they would never overcome what had happened and would always feel dirty, like damaged goods. Yet Falder showed no sympathy for his victims. When someone said they were ready to end it all, he coldly replied that those images would still circulate on the internet, adding, "So what good would that do you?" On October 16, 2017, Matthew Falder appeared in court. The atmosphere in the courtroom was suffocatingly tense. For 35 minutes, the prosecutor read out the long list of his crimes, a relentless indictment, each word exposing the true face of this monster in human form. The courtroom fell silent, but the man in the dock remained motionless. Falder showed no remorse. He just sat there, emotionless, as if he had never inflicted pain on anyone. Phil McKay, a BBC journalist with 25 years of experience covering trials, admitted that he had never witnessed a case as horrifying as Falder's. On February 17, 2018, the final verdict for Matthew Falder was announced. A landmark sentence, 32 years in prison, plus an additional 6 years on extended license. In the silent courtroom, the judge looked directly at him, unable to hide his disgust. "You are not merely an abuser. You are an internet murderer." No victim had died in the traditional sense, but what Falder had done had destroyed many lives. He had killed trust, killed peace, and killed the will to live in innocent people. For them, the pain endures, and it will never end. Will Kerr, the director of the National Crime Agency's Vulnerable Persons Team, issued a stern warning. Falder did not act alone. There are still many predators lurking on dark websites that we have yet to capture. His statement underscored a grim reality. While Falder's arrest was a victory, the fight against online exploitation was far from over. Organizations once associated with Matthew Falder swiftly distanced themselves from him after his horrific crimes came to light. The University of Cambridge expressed outrage and took the rare step of actively seeking to revoke his degree. The University of Birmingham, where Falder had pursued postdoctoral research, declared that they were deeply shocked and saddened by his criminal actions. Meanwhile, Gumtree, one of the platforms Falder had exploited, welcomed his sentence and reaffirmed their commitment to user safety and efforts to prevent similar abuses in the future. It seemed that this sentence had brought Falder's case to a close, but just months later, his 32-year sentence was reduced to 25 years after he successfully appealed. This decision immediately sparked public outrage. How could someone who had destroyed dozens of lives and spread terror for nearly a decade receive a reduced sentence? The debate ignited not only over the severity of the sentence, but also over the safety of the online space. Should the online platforms that Falder exploited be held accountable? Had they done enough to protect their users? Law enforcement agencies quickly called for stricter content control on the dark web, emphasizing that capturing someone like Falder was merely the tip of the iceberg. No one could know how many other predators were still lurking out there, waiting for the opportunity to target vulnerable individuals. Although Falder was imprisoned, the fight against criminals like him was far from over. Rhyme story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more gripping cases on our channel. Case 5. The haunting story began on Saturday afternoon, August 10th, when a horrifying incident occurred at the Easton City Cemetery in Pennsylvania, USA. Before that, residents living near the area began to notice a strange, foul odor emanating from an abandoned crypt within the cemetery grounds. This crypt had previously been used as a cold storage facility, where bodies were kept before burial. When news of the smell spread, an investigative team was quickly assembled to address the situation. The crypt was located at the foot of a steep hill, with gray, windowless stone walls. The main door of the crypt was the only entrance, and the rescue team had to put in considerable effort to unlock it. When the door was opened, a damp, dark space appeared, and inside, they found a severely decomposed body. The victim's body was discovered in an old, rotted coffin, deep within the crypt area. As soon as they approached the scene, investigators noticed many unusual signs, indicating that this was not a simple natural death or accident. The victim's entire body was covered with numerous severe wounds, stretching from the chest down to the limbs. Many of these wounds showed signs of being inflicted by sharp objects or from strong impacts. Particularly, the upper torso of the victim was covered with old newspapers that had yellowed over time. However, after comparing the publication dates and printed content, Forensic experts determined that these newspapers had been published years earlier and were entirely irrelevant in determining the time of death. Their use might have been solely for temporary concealment or to mislead the investigation. The detail that drew special attention from investigators was that the lower part of the victim's body had been completely stripped. This immediately raised serious suspicions that the victim might have been assaulted before death. From the traces left on the body and the arrangement of the scene, the special investigation team suspected that the victim was killed at another location and then brought here to be hidden. Hiding the victim in a coffin in the middle of the cemetery might have been a diversionary tactic, making others think it was just a regular grave. Therefore, investigators had to be more cautious than ever in uncovering the mysteries surrounding the victim's death. During the on-site examination, they determined that the victim was a black woman, approximately 5 feet tall and weighing around 110 pounds. However, examiners faced a significant challenge when they noticed that the body had decomposed severely over time. These signs of decomposition made it nearly impossible to determine the exact cause of death, as the physical evidence was no longer clear. This added to their confusion during the investigation, as there were no clear clues about what led to the victim's death. Due to insufficient information to clarify the case, the police invited entomology experts to assist in the investigation. Upon inspection, they found numerous larvae of the black blowfly Formia regina on the body, commonly appearing in damp environments during the summer. The larva had reached the 3rd stage of development, indicating that the body had been at the scene for a considerable time. After comparing the species' development cycle with the temperature inside the crypt, experts determined that the victim's death likely occurred between July 27th and 29th. The police immediately reviewed missing person reports filed during that period to find clues. They discovered that this was also the time when a prostitute named Kathleen Segusti had contacted the police. She reported being assaulted by 3 men, Corey Mayweather, Kwame Henry, and Stanley Obis, during a conflict. However, the subsequent information that Kathleen revealed made the situation even more serious, as she claimed that these 3 men were the perpetrators of a murder. Kathleen recounted that, the previous week, the 3 men had kidnapped a 19-year-old girl named Madron Smith. They accused the young girl of stealing illegal substances worth $2,000. The witness said that, due to her transactional relationship with Corey's group, she had agreed to let them stay at her place. Thus, the 3 men took Madron to Kathleen's house, where they kept the young girl in the basement. After Corey and Kwame dragged Madron down to the basement, Kathleen heard the girls sobbing and pleading coming from below. Madron's cries grew increasingly desperate, indicating her pain and panic. However, shortly after Corey began to brutally beat the girl. Sensing the situation was getting out of hand, Kathleen decided to go downstairs to see what was happening. But as she approached the stairs, Stanley immediately blocked her. Not only did he stand in her way, but he also pulled out a sharp knife and quickly stabbed Kathleen's hand, causing her pain and preventing her from moving down to the basement. Meanwhile, Madron's pleas grew fainter, but they still didn't stop. After about 40 minutes, the girl's cries suddenly ceased, making Kathleen fearful, but she had no idea what was happening below. A while later, the 3 men together carried a large sack out of the basement and left Kathleen's house. With these clear signs, Kathleen believed that Madron had been brutally tortured and ultimately killed by these thugs. The feeling of unease and fear made Kathleen unable to stop thinking about what had happened to the young girl, and she decided to report the incident to the police, hoping that the truth would be revealed. In the past, the police had often faced difficulties due to inaccurate or fabricated statements from sex workers, making them increasingly cautious when handling such sources of information. However, the severity of the case described by Kathleen made the police unable to ignore it and prompted them to verify the details she provided. To clarify what had happened, the police began by inspecting Kathleen's house. They paid particular attention to the basement, where Kathleen claimed to have heard the young girl's heartbreaking cries, but after a thorough examination, the police found no signs indicating that a murder or torture had taken place there. Although there was no direct evidence from the scene, the police did not stop there. They continued to check databases of missing persons in the area, hoping to find information about the 19-year-old girl Kathleen had described, named Madron Smith. However, this search also yielded no results. There were no missing person reports matching the information Kathleen provided. All investigative and search efforts yielded nothing, and the details Kathleen described seemed unprovable. This left the police puzzled and doubtful about the credibility of the woman's statements. Since there was no evidence to support Kathleen's claims, the police quickly dismissed what she had said. However, just when everything seemed to have settled down, 5 days later, the body of a young girl was unexpectedly discovered at the city cemetery. This matched what Kathleen had recounted in her statement, saying that the murder took place around that time. With these findings, the case started to show clearer leads. The police continued investigating and used the collected information to move toward identifying the perpetrator of this brutal murder. After comparing the body with the information Kathleen had provided, the police believed that the victim was Madeline Smith, the girl Kathleen had previously mentioned. However, when conducting forensic examinations, the results made the situation more complicated. The examination revealed that the dental characteristics of the body matched those of a 13-year-old child, while Madeline Smith was believed to be 19 years old. This did not match Kathleen's information, causing the police to question the true identity of the victim. To accurately determine the victim's identity, investigators expanded their search, checking missing person databases across the United States. They looked for individuals whose physical characteristics matched the victim found in the crypt. After a long time comparing records, they finally found a suspicious case. When comparing dental records from a missing girl with the victim's dental data, authorities recognized that the victim was Restless. Restless, who had been missing for a long time, turned out to be one of the victims the police were searching for. In reality, she had been using a false name and lying about her age, making the investigation much more challenging. However, thanks to the combination of important information and meticulous investigative work, the police were finally able to identify the victim's true identity and began to focus on uncovering the cause of her death. Restless grew up in a middle-class family in Long Island, New York. Her family had a stable financial background, and she was raised in a caring and loving environment. However, her life began to change drastically after her father passed away. The sudden loss of her father caused a profound emotional shock for Restless, leaving her unable to overcome the pain of loss. From then on, she became rebellious and gradually lost direction in life. Gradually, Restless distanced herself from her family's care and began seeking negative influences to fill the emptiness inside her. This change made her family worried and unable to control the situation. Losing direction, she started down the wrong path. Unable to find joy or solace in studies or positive activities, Restless became involved in drug trafficking from New York to Pennsylvania, a dangerous, tempting job. This was a path she could not escape, and through it, she came into contact with dangerous drug dealers like Corey Mayweather and Kwame Henry. Eventually, after leaving her home and family, Restless lost contact with everyone. Her family could not trace her, and all search efforts became futile. When the police found the girl's body and identified it as Restless, they began to revisit Kathleen's statements. Despite her untrustworthy past, the prostitute had provided crucial clues about those potentially involved in Restless's death. The police hoped that with this new information, they could quickly find the culprit and bring the case closer to the truth. However, things were not as simple as they thought. Although the clues had been clarified, the case became even more complicated with inexplicable details. During the 40-minute period when Restless was held in the basement, Kathleen repeatedly heard the young girl's screams and pleas. The sobbing cries, filled with pain, echoed from below, making Kathleen feel worried and sympathetic. But she could do nothing, because Stanley was blocking her. Meanwhile, the two suspects, Corey Mayweather and Kwame Henry, occasionally went to the kitchen to get some utensils before returning to the basement. Actions that Kathleen noted and later reported when the case came to light. When the police examined the kitchen utensils that the two men had taken during that time, they found traces of human enzymes on some items. This further reinforced the theory that these objects might have been used as torture tools. However, despite the clear evidence, the case still lacked direct proof to charge the three suspects Corey Mayweather, Kwame Henry, and Stanley Obis. Although Kathleen provided crucial information, she did not actually witness what happened in the basement, so her statements were only indirect. Moreover, with Kathleen's questionable background, her testimony could be challenged in court, making the pursuit of justice more complicated. The police still had to continue investigating and searching for concrete evidence to prove the crimes committed by the three men. With no new leads, the police decided to return to the crypt area where Restless Williams' body had previously been discovered. They began digging through the dirt, rocks, and trash at the crime scene, hoping to find something that could link the suspects to the case. After some time searching, they discovered a piece of chewing gum about 1.5 inches long, hardened and reddish in color. Despite being dusty, the gum still maintained a relatively clear shape. What particularly caught the investigators' attention was the distinct bite mark visible on the gum. Not far from there, the police found a crumpled gum wrapper, which still had the brand name Big Red readable on it. This is a popular cinnamon-flavored gum, especially in urban areas. Upon finding this clue, investigators immediately recalled the suspect Corey Mayweather, who they had been monitoring earlier. Corey had a habit of chewing Big Red gum and always carried several packs with him wherever he went. This made the gum and wrapper significant evidence, as they could directly indicate Corey's presence at the scene where Richetta's body was found. Forensic dental experts were called in to compare the bite marks on the gum with Corey Mayweather's dental structure. The comparison showed a clear match, increasing investigators' suspicions about Corey's presence at the crime scene. However, to further strengthen the evidence, the police decided to have the gum analyzed for DNA. Unfortunately, the analysis was unsuccessful because the amount of DNA on the gum was too small to accurately identify the person who chewed it. Nevertheless, when the police hired an independent dental expert to re-examine the gum, his conclusion was the same as that of the police experts. The expert also pointed out that the bite marks on the gum completely matched Corey's dental structure. Faced with this undeniable evidence, Corey Mayweather had no choice but to confess to his crime. He decided to plead guilty to avoid the death penalty, despite previously denying all involvement. Corey's confession marked a major breakthrough in the case, helping investigators and prosecutors move closer to uncovering the truth. With the evidence obtained, the prosecutor decided to indict the three suspects Corey Mayweather, Kwame Henry, and Stanley Obis for the death of Richetza Williams. The prosecutor accused them of torturing the underage girl to death. However, suspect Stanley adamantly denied direct involvement in the torture and murder of Richetza. He claimed that he was the one standing at the basement door, only fetching the items. Kwame Henry requested, including electrical cords, cables, some household chemicals, and a bottle opener. Stanley stated that Corey and Kwame were the ones who directly assaulted Richetza, punishing her for allegedly stealing $2,000 worth of drugs. Additionally, the two of them used a heated coat hanger to torture the victim, causing her to endure horrific injuries before dying. Some speculated that Stanley Obis had romantic feelings for Richetza, which could have been why he was not allowed to participate in what was happening in the basement. In October 1998, Corey Mayweather was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole for first-degree murder. Corey explained that it all started when they suspected Richetza Williams of stealing a large quantity of drugs. In a fit of rage, the group decided to punish her. On July 28, 1996, they took Richetza to Kathleen's house in Easton, Pennsylvania, where the horrifying torture began. After dragging her into the basement, Corey and Kwame used crude tools, including electrical cords, household chemicals, and a heated coat hanger, to brutally abuse Richetza. Stanley Obis, although not directly involved in the torture, stood outside and prevented Kathleen from intervening. Throughout the ordeal, Richetza screamed and pleaded for mercy, but her cries only made the three perpetrators more ruthless. After the brutal torture, they decided to end Richetza's life. With the victim exhausted and showing no signs of life, they decided not to leave any trace that could lead the law to them. They quickly placed Richetza's body in a large sack, tied it up, and moved it to a secluded cemetery outside the city center. It was one of the least frequented places, ideal for disposing of the body without being detected. When they brought the body to the cemetery, the group didn't stop there. They made another cruel decision without a hint of regret or fear. The criminals placed Richetza's body in an old, worn-out coffin, then left the scene after completing their crime. They thought they had successfully concealed their crime, but the frightening evidence, from the chewing gum to the traces in the crypt, helped the police gradually unravel the mystery. Corey Mayweather's confession after his arrest became the key for the police to continue investigating and convicting not only him, but also his accomplices, Kwame Henry and Stanley Obis. Although Stanley Obis did not directly cause Richetza's death, he still played a significant role in the crime by participating in the abduction and transporting the victim's body to the hiding place. The judge acknowledged that Obis's actions still contributed to the series of brutal crimes committed by the group. The pain and suffering endured by the victim during the kidnapping and the haunting death in the crypt further highlighted the ruthlessness of the perpetrators. Therefore, even though he did not directly commit the murder, Obus was still convicted and held accountable for participating in this crime. A few years later, in 1999, Kwame Henry, one of the suspects in the case, was finally arrested while hiding in Trinidad and Tobago, a country in the southern Caribbean. The police received information from reliable sources and conducted a manhunt. After being arrested, Kwame Henry was extradited to the United States to face trial. In court, he was under strict supervision and subjected to rigorous legal proceedings. His crimes had sparked public outrage and sorrow. After thorough investigation and trial, Kwame Henry was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, a harsh sentence reflecting the severity of his criminal acts, especially the murder he committed. Case 6. On the afternoon of June 4, 2008, in a quiet suburb of Mesa, Arizona, 30-year-old Travis Alexander stepped into the shower of his home, unaware that it would be the last thing he ever did. Just minutes earlier, he had been laughing, posing for photos, completely at ease. But behind the lens was someone he once trusted, someone whose calm exterior hid a storm of rage, jealousy, and obsession. What happened in the moments that followed would spark one of the most shocking murder investigations in modern American history. A trail of blood, a broken camera, and a story that kept changing. On June 9, 2008, in Mesa, Arizona, a group of friends became increasingly concerned about 30-year-old Travis Alexander. No one had heard from him in 5 days, and it was out of character for the outgoing, sociable young man to go completely silent. After several unanswered calls and messages since June 4th, his friends decided to check on him in person. When they arrived at his home, everything on the outside appeared normal. They rang the doorbell multiple times, but got no response. Before leaving, one of them remembered that a mutual friend knew the garage door code. After explaining the situation, that friend agreed to come by and help. As soon as they entered through the garage, a foul smell hit them. At first, they thought it could be from Travis' dog, who greeted them upon entry. But as they made their way upstairs, the odor intensified. Something was very wrong. They knocked on the door to Travis' room, but there was no answer. In the adjacent room lived one of Travis' housemates, Zach Billings. When they knocked on his door, he emerged surprised. Zach hadn't seen Travis in a week, and believed he was away on a trip to Cancun with a woman he had recently been dating. Zach had a spare key to Travis' bedroom and opened the door. Inside, they found a large pool of blood soaking into the carpet, leading to the bathroom. There, in the shower, they discovered Travis' body, curled in the fetal position. He had suffered 29 stab wounds, a deep slash across his throat that severed his carotid artery, jugular vein, and trachea, and a gunshot wound above his left eyebrow. His fingers and toes had darkened from livor mortis, indicating he had been dead for several days. They immediately called 911. During the call, they mentioned that Travis had an ex-girlfriend, Jodi Arias, who had shown troubling behavior in the past. When authorities arrived at the scene, there were no signs of forced entry, and the house was undisturbed, suggesting the killer was someone Travis knew and trusted. Blood spatter lined the hallway and bathroom walls. A bloody left-hand palm print was found on the wall, and the bathroom sink was streaked with blood. Clumps of long, dark hair, clearly from a woman, were found in the shower and on the floor. Police also discovered a digital camera inside the washing machine, soaked and seemingly destroyed. Forensic technicians were able to recover several images from its memory card. The photos, taken on June 4th, showed Travis and Jodi Arias in intimate poses. The final image, time-stamped at 5:29 p.m., captured Travis alive in the shower, followed by accidental shots believed to have been taken moments after the attack began. Investigators interviewed everyone close to Travis, including his roommates. They admitted noticing a strange smell, but dismissed it as dirty dishes or trash. DNA samples were collected from all who had contact with the victim. Soon, Jodi Arias' name came up repeatedly. Travis had ended their relationship months earlier, citing her obsessive and controlling behavior. She had slashed his tires and constantly checked his phone. While police prepared to contact her, Jodi herself unexpectedly reached out to authorities. She claimed to be devastated and offered to help, stating the last time she saw Travis was in April. Born July 9, 1980, in Salinas, California, Jodi Arias was the daughter of William and Sandy Arias. She had 3 siblings and grew up in what appeared to be a calm household. However, Jodi later alleged she was physically abused by her parents starting at age 7. From a young age, She had a deep interest in photography and pursued it throughout her teenage years. In the fall of 2001, Jodi Arias began working as a waitress at a restaurant in Carmel, California. 2 years later, in 2003, she started dating the manager, Daryl Brewer, who was nearly twice her age. Jodi was 21 and Daryl was 40. Their relationship started off strong. Jodi was affectionate and dependable, and the two shared a deep connection filled with passion and stability. By May 2005, they bought a home together in Palm Desert, California, agreeing to split the mortgage. In early 2006, Jodi took a new job with Prepaid Legal Services, a company offering affordable legal help and organizing seminars. Just 1 month into the role, she became interested in the Mormon faith and started attending church. Her newfound religious commitment quickly created tension in her relationship with Daryl. She told him she no longer wanted to be physically intimate, stating she wished to save herself for marriage as her church teachings encouraged. Despite this declaration, she soon underwent breast augmentation surgery and abruptly ended the relationship. In September 2006, Jodi met 29-year-old Travis Alexander at a company conference in Las Vegas, Nevada. The attraction was instant. Travis, a successful motivational speaker, had grown up in a chaotic environment. The son of drug-addicted parents, he was one of 8 siblings. After his parents divorced, he was raised by his paternal grandmother, a devout Mormon, and he adopted the church's teachings as his own. Despite facing immense adversity throughout his childhood and teenage years, Travis used his story to inspire others. He worked hard to build a stable life and become a symbol of personal growth. After the conference, Travis and Jodi exchanged numbers, though he lived in Arizona and she in California. Just a week later, they met again, and that night, they became physically intimate. What followed was a period of constant communication, texts, calls, emails, and daily contact. On November 26, 2006, Jodi was baptized into the Mormon Church, hoping to become more compatible with Travis. 3 months later, they made their relationship official, and Jodi relocated to Mesa, Arizona to be closer to him. But soon after, things took a dark turn. Jodi discovered messages from another woman on Travis' phone and accused him of being unfaithful. Her behavior shifted dramatically. She became increasingly jealous, possessive, and emotionally unstable. She frequently checked his phone, questioned his whereabouts, and lashed out in anger. Travis, once optimistic about the relationship, began to feel trapped. He confided in friends that Jodi was pulling him away from his faith, and that he was beginning to question whether she was the kind of person he wanted in his life. The relationship officially ended in June 2007 after just 4 months. However, they continued having secret sexual encounters, often traveling together for business events. Jodi believed they still had a future. Travis, meanwhile, began dating other women. He suspected Jodi had vandalized his car, slashing his tires on 2 occasions, and that she had sent anonymous threatening emails to both him and his new partner. Friends recalled him saying that she had once broken into his house by crawling through the doggy door. Despite these red flags, their physical relationship continued. They exchanged intimate photographs, and Jodi remained fixated on him. By mid-2008, Travis had told friends that Jodi had hacked into his social media accounts and accessed his bank information. He said he felt haunted by her and didn't know how to break free. Their final break came when Travis invited another woman, Mimi Hall, to accompany him to a planned trip to Cancun on June 15, 2008. He had initially intended to go with Jodi, but changed his plans at the last minute. When Jodi learned she had been replaced, she was enraged. On May 28, 2008, a burglary was reported at the home of Jodi's grandparents in Eureka, California, where she was living at the time. Among the stolen items was a handgun. On the morning of June 2nd, Jodi left her grandparents' house at 5:39 a.m. She traveled to Redding, California, where she rented a car at 8:04 a.m. offered a red vehicle. She declined and requested a more discreet color. She also brought gasoline containers with her, an unusual detail that would later reveal her attempt to conceal her travel route. Jodi told friends and contacts that she was headed to Utah to meet with a colleague named Ryan Burns, who also worked with Prepaid Legal Services. Her true destination, however, was Mesa, Arizona, an 11-hour drive from her starting point. The gas canisters allowed her to refuel without stopping at public gas stations, thereby avoiding security cameras and leaving no digital payment trail. Between 1 a.m. and 3 p.m. on June 3, 2008, Jodi Arias called Travis Alexander 4 times. He never picked up. Eventually, Travis returned her calls, first with an 18-minute conversation, followed by another lasting 41 minutes. What they spoke about remains unknown, but what happened next would change everything. On June 4th, Arias showed up in Salt Lake City to meet Ryan Burns, a colleague she had planned to see. Burns immediately noticed something was off. Jodi's signature, long blonde hair, was dyed a darker shade, and her hands were marked with cuts. When asked about the injuries, she casually explained they were from a broken glass at work. Aside from her altered appearance, she seemed cheerful, even more upbeat than usual. That same day, Travis failed to show up for a scheduled conference call. His absence raised concern among friends, especially since he was usually punctual and professional. Days passed without any word from him. Then, on June 9th, his body was discovered in his Mesa, Arizona home in a gruesome scene that left his friends and the community in shock. On June 17th, Jodi voluntarily gave her DNA and fingerprints to investigators. At that time, she wasn't seen as a primary suspect. Her cooperation and calm demeanor didn't match the erratic, possessive woman Travis's friends had described, but that changed 2 days later. Forensic technicians managed to retrieve deleted images from Travis's damaged digital camera. The photos, dated June 4th, showed Jodi and Travis in intimate poses. The final images, taken just before his death, captured Travis in the shower, alive. One of the last shots showed his bloodied body on the bathroom floor, and another appeared to show Jodi's foot. When police contacted Jodi again, she denied ever being in Mesa. She claimed she had been in Salt Lake City at the time of the murder, and that Ryan Burns could confirm it. Burns did back up her alibi, except for noting the odd hair color and the cuts on her hands. Lab results soon revealed something much more damning. A bloody palm print at the crime scene contained DNA from both Jodi and Travis. By July 15, 2008, investigators had enough evidence to bring her in for formal questioning. Detective Esteban Flores led the interrogation. He challenged her timeline, pointing out that her trip from California to Utah had an unexplained 18-hour gap. Cell phone records showed her device had been turned off for a long period, likely to avoid leaving a digital trail. Even when confronted with the forensic evidence, blood, fingerprints, and photographs, Jodi denied everything. She insisted the images had been altered, and that she had no knowledge of what happened. Then she broke into tears. What followed stunned everyone watching the surveillance footage. When left alone in the interrogation room, Jodi began behaving erratically, kneeling on the floor, then standing on her head, later singing calmly to herself, and finally talking aloud as if someone were in the room. When informed she would be photographed for booking, she even asked if she could apply makeup and smiled, asking, "How do I look?" before the camera flashed. In the days that followed, her story changed. First, she admitted she had been with Travis the night of his death. But now she introduced a new tale. 2 masked intruders, one male, one female, had broken into the house, murdered Travis, and let her live after threatening to kill her family if she spoke out. She claimed to have hidden in a closet during the attack and fled after the killers left. Still, her tears and trembling voice couldn't mask the inconsistencies in her story. Eventually, Jodi shifted her narrative once again. This time, she confessed to killing Travis, but claimed it was an act of self-defense. She alleged he had attacked her in a fit of rage, and she fought back. She couldn't recall the details, she said, only that she found herself driving later with blood on her hands and no clear memory of what had occurred. After committing the murder of Travis Alexander, Jodi Arias fled across the desert. Along the way, she stopped her vehicle, changed clothes, and discarded the blood-stained garments in a dumpster. Then she continued driving toward her destination. Not long after, she appeared in front of the media, confidently proclaiming her innocence. She told reporters that the evidence would exonerate her and that no jury would ever convict her because, as she stated, she was not guilty. Despite carefully crafting her alibi, meticulously planning the route, and attempting to erase any trace of her presence, the reality was far more damning than she anticipated. As investigators reconstructed the events of June 4th, a chilling sequence emerged. That afternoon, Jodi and Travis had been intimate, as they had many times before, and took several photos together. Afterward, Travis stepped into the shower. As he did, Jodi retrieved a knife she had hidden beneath her clothes. Under the pretense of continuing the photo session, she entered the bathroom. In the final image, Travis is seen sitting in the shower, moments before the first stab. She attacked him with brutal force. Defensive wounds on his hands showed he tried to fight back. Bleeding heavily, he stumbled out of the shower and reached the sink. There, he coughed up blood, staining the counter. He tried to call for help, but couldn't. As he attempted to escape down the hallway, Jody followed and stabbed him repeatedly in the back. She eventually pulled his head back and slit his throat, leaving a massive pool of blood on the carpet, later discovered by his friends. In an attempt to drag his body back to the bathroom, Jody pressed a bloody hand against the wall for support. A crucial piece of evidence, a palm print containing both her and Travis' DNA. During the struggle, the camera they'd used earlier fell and accidentally snapped a blurry image of Jody's foot next to Travis' blood-soaked body. After seeing him convulsing from the trauma, she fired a final shot into his forehead. The entire attack took roughly 2 minutes and 34 seconds. Jodi Arias' trial began on January 2, 2013. Her defense claimed self-defense. She admitted to killing Travis, but alleged that he had attacked her after she dropped his camera. According to her, he became enraged, struck her, and broke her finger. In fear, she said, she ran to his closet, grabbed a gun she claimed belonged to him, and fired in desperation. When he kept coming, she claimed she stabbed him, but had no memory of how or when. Prosecutors argued otherwise. The evidence, they said, pointed to a premeditated and calculated murder. Witness testimony confirmed she had borrowed gas canisters from her ex-boyfriend Daryl Brewer, suggesting she intended to make a long drive without stopping, thereby avoiding security cameras and receipts. Audio recordings and explicit messages revealed a complicated and toxic sexual relationship between Travis and Jodi. While she painted herself as a victim of verbal and physical abuse, prosecutors highlighted her obsessive behavior and history of manipulation. At one point, she even accused Travis of being a pedophile, an unsubstantiated claim that further muddied the emotional tone of the trial. To bolster her defense, Jodi's lawyers argued that she had suffered memory loss due to extreme psychological trauma. A clinical psychologist testified that Arias may have experienced an acute stress response, triggering a fight-or-flight reaction that disrupted her ability to form memories. He suggested she exhibited symptoms of anxiety stemming from long-term trauma. However, the prosecution psychologist provided a contrasting diagnosis: borderline personality disorder. He described Jodi as emotionally unstable, manipulative, and prone to intense, erratic behavior. During the trial, Arias spent 18 days on the witness stand, often contradicting her previous statements and displaying theatrical emotion. After 15 hours of deliberation, the jury found her guilty of first-degree murder on May 23, 2013. During the sentencing phase, however, jurors couldn't agree on whether she should receive the death penalty. The process moved to a second jury, which convened on October 20, 2014. That jury also failed to reach a unanimous decision, voting 11-1 in favor of death. With the death penalty no longer an option, the final decision rested with the judge. On April 13, 2015, Jodi Arias was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She was later transferred to Perryville Prison in Goodyear, Arizona, where she continues to serve her sentence. Since her incarceration, she has been moved multiple times within the Arizona prison system. Despite her many attempts to rewrite the narrative, the evidence and testimony ultimately told the real story, one of obsession, control, and a brutal crime that shocked the nation. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations. Case 7. Michelle was born on October 12, 1984, in San Diego, California. She came from a large, close-knit family. She lived with her parents, her brother Michael, and their cousin Christine, and their home was always full of energy thanks to the many aunts, uncles, and 15 cousins who were constantly around. Michelle looked up to her mother, a dedicated nurse, and dreamed of following in her footsteps. After her mother passed away, that dream became her mission. Determined to honor her legacy, Michelle took on a nurturing role in the family. Her brother Michael recalled how she stepped in with strength and love, becoming a guiding force for everyone around her. She helped teach her siblings and cousins how to cook, how to drive, and offered advice whenever they needed it. She was the person they all turned to. Michelle had waited 5 years for a spot in a nursing program and was finally accepted into an accelerated 1-year course. By May 2011, she was only 6 months away from graduating. She had straight A's and was completing her clinical rotation at the maternity ward of Kaiser Permanente in Hayward. Always smiling, incredibly hardworking, and full of optimism, Michelle never hesitated to help or take on extra tasks. On May 20th, 2011, she was working a regular shift at the hospital. It was a Friday, the last day for the student nurses at the facility, and excitement was in the air with the weekend just around the corner. Michelle had even made plans to visit friends in Reno. At 6:55 p.m., she told her supervisor she was stepping out to grab something from her car in the third-floor parking garage. Her white Honda SUV was parked in the corner. Surveillance later showed her walking toward the car, pausing, changing direction, and then eventually, the SUV driving away from the lot about 17 minutes later. By 9 p.m., when the staff tried to gather the students to close out the day, Michelle was still missing. Her coat was still in the break room. Her phone kept ringing with no answer, and she hadn't signed out. Worried, her instructor went to the parking garage with hospital security to check her usual spot. It was empty and quiet. Suddenly, Michelle's SUV returned to the hospital and drove up to the third floor. The instructor tried to wave it down. The car stopped briefly, reversed, then quickly drove away again. The behavior was so out of character that the instructor was convinced it wasn't Michelle behind the wheel. She immediately called the police. By the next morning, no one had heard from Michelle in over 10 hours. Friends and colleagues flooded the police station, insisting something was very wrong. Investigators began at the hospital parking lot. Soon, police discovered bloodstains in the area where Michelle's car had been parked. By 9 a.m., they found her SUV parked in a visitor's space outside an apartment building less than a mile away. The vehicle was locked. Inside was her laptop and an ID card from her university, belonging to someone Michelle didn't know. That ID had been reported stolen days before she disappeared. Investigators ruled out a random attack. This looked calculated. Someone familiar with Michelle's schedule had likely used the stolen ID to get close to her. Hospital records revealed a strange phone call about 30 minutes after Michelle left for her car. A woman claiming to be Michelle called the ER, asked to speak to her instructor, and when told she had the wrong department, asked that a message be passed along. Her father had suffered a heart attack. As police towed Michelle's car for examination, Michael, her brother, received a text from her phone. "I'm fine." Moments later, another message read, "I'm not missing. My phone's been acting up. It deleted everything and drained my battery." Her friends began receiving messages too, each with different explanations. She had a flat tire. She went back to Reno. She was sick. She needed a break from social media. Her ex-boyfriend texted her. The response? "Who is this?" By May 31st, a reward was set at $20,000. It climbed to nearly $50,000 within days. The Law family hired a private investigator. Over 100 volunteers joined the search, splitting into 14 teams covering miles of ground. The reward eventually hit $100,000. As detectives looked deeper into Michelle's life, one name kept coming up, Giselle Esteban, an old friend. They had once been very close, and even moved together for college. Giselle had been in a relationship with a man named Scott, and they shared a 6-year-old daughter. But after their breakup, tension between Michelle and Giselle began to surface. Years earlier, Michelle and Scott had gone on a few casual dates, but agreed they were better off as friends. Still, Giselle became obsessed with the idea that there had been more between them. Despite no real reason to be suspicious, Giselle's behavior toward Michelle began to shift. Michelle refused to cut ties with Scott, just to appease Giselle's unfounded jealousy. She had moved on, dating someone else entirely, and Scott was simply a friend. Eventually, the friendship between Michelle and Giselle fell apart. When police approached 27-year-old Giselle, she made no effort to hide her disdain for Michelle. And then the investigation led to Scott. What they discovered next would change everything. Scott had always been around, familiar to many who knew Michelle, and even joined in the efforts to find her when she went missing. Detectives noted how sincere and visibly shaken he appeared during questioning. When Scott spoke with investigators, he opened up about the ongoing turmoil he had been experiencing with his ex, Giselle. Their relationship had been turbulent, filled with repeated conflicts. At one point, during a particularly difficult time, Giselle returned to her family home, taking their daughter with her. Despite the chaos, Scott remained committed to his daughter's well-being. In hopes of creating a stable environment, he tried several times to repair things with Giselle, but it never worked. He provided investigators with a long series of messages Giselle had sent, many laced with anger and targeted venomously at Michelle. In one message, she wrote, "I hope you find what you're looking for in someone as disgusting as her." Another read, Michelle has dug her own grave by being a homewrecker and whore. She won't be a problem much longer. The tone of these texts grew increasingly threatening with statements like, your whore will get what she deserves, and she won't pass her midterms. Michelle herself had received messages from Giselle, including one saying, if you were ever really a friend to Scott or me, you'd just leave us alone. You're just the whore who followed me to San Francisco. In a deeply troubling revelation, Scott also shared an audio recording he had taken during one of Giselle's outbursts. She had been in a car with their daughter in the back seat. In the recording, she confronts him about Michelle and issues disturbing threats. Her voice, cold and resolute, is heard saying, if you do it again, this is your last and final. I will take your life and hers. You can take that to the grave. Scott explained that Giselle had previously been hospitalized for psychiatric evaluation and was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and manic depression. On several occasions, she would appear at his home uninvited, quietly entering and sitting alone until someone noticed her. Eventually, Scott was awarded full custody of their daughter. This decision escalated tensions even further. Giselle moved back to Hayward to remain nearby, and things intensified until a judge granted a restraining order against her, forbidding her from coming within 100 feet of Scott or his family. The order was issued just 3 days before Michelle Liu disappeared. Meanwhile, authorities in Hayward began coordinating with Fairfield police regarding another unsolved case from the previous year involving a nurse with the same last name who had also mysteriously disappeared. Unlike in the Fairfield case, Michelle's car had been found locked and secured, which indicated that whoever last drove it had been careful to avoid detection. Surveillance footage was being analyzed, and her family continued to hope for her safe return. However, that hope began to dim when investigators informed the family that Michelle's car had tested positive for her blood. Though specific details weren't shared with them, police confirmed that the case was now officially being treated as a homicide. Despite the heartbreaking update, Michelle's family refused to give up and continued searching for her. Giselle's name kept surfacing, so detectives brought her in for a formal interview. She was visibly pregnant and acknowledged being at the hospital the night Michelle vanished, claiming she had gone for a checkup. When asked about her past friendship with Michelle, she admitted things had changed after what she described as a betrayal. Though she was released after the interview, police remained focused on her and placed a GPS tracker on her car. They were convinced she played a role in Michelle's disappearance. What remained uncertain was whether she had acted alone. Given her physical size, investigators questioned whether she could have committed the crime without help. With growing suspicion and mounting evidence, Giselle had become the central person of interest in the case of Michelle's disappearance. Police went to Giselle's apartment, accompanied by a crime lab team that meticulously examined her car and even went through the trash. Despite the growing scrutiny, no formal charges had been filed at the time, and Giselle maintained in interviews with local media that she had no involvement in Michelle's disappearance. The investigation took a dramatic turn when Scott contacted police with a chilling discovery. Michelle's phone had been found in the back seat of his own car. Surveillance data confirmed that Giselle's car had made several visits to Scott Street, stopping outside his house repeatedly. Investigators believe she had planted the phone there deliberately. Further evidence came from security staff at the nursing school, who reviewed entry data tied to a stolen ID badge that had eventually been found in Michelle's Honda. On May 26th, just 1 day before Michelle vanished, someone had used the badge to gain access to restricted areas of the campus. Surveillance confirmed that person was Giselle Esteban. Disguised as a prospective student, Giselle had managed to escape from the school, managed to acquire the ID, and began wandering the building, trying locked doors and entering classrooms. After the school closed for the day, she returned, wearing a white lab coat. She entered again through a back door, moved through the same areas, checked computers, and eventually made her way to a teacher's desk, where she examined student schedules, including Michelle's. Now armed with the knowledge of Michelle's whereabouts and class breaks, Giselle had everything she needed. Analysis of cell phone records showed that after Michelle disappeared, her phone and Giselle's had been located in the same area at the same time. The following day, Giselle was seen entering an Apple store, where she asked technicians to unlock an iPhone, claiming her daughter had accidentally locked it. After gaining access, she left the store and was captured on camera at a nearby restaurant using the phone, sending fake messages to Michelle's friends. Cell tower data confirmed it was Michelle's phone. The footage showed Giselle operating the device, pretending to be Michelle. Even without a body, authorities had compiled a mountain of evidence. Giselle Esteban, 27, was arrested at her residence and charged with first-degree murder. A pair of shoes found near her front door had Michelle's blood on the soles. In Michelle's car, a strand of hair matched Giselle, and her DNA was also found on the steering wheel. At the time of her arrest, Michelle was still missing. Her family issued a statement affirming their commitment to finding her. Our focus is, and will always be, to bring Michelle home. Until we know where she is, we cannot begin to find peace. For investigators, the case had become even more disturbing following a search of Giselle's computer. In the days before Michelle vanished, Giselle had been researching how to induce heart attacks undetectably, how to follow someone without being noticed, how to break into secured areas, and the effects of lethal substances like potassium chloride and carbon monoxide. After Michelle disappeared, Giselle searched her name online over 300 times. Then, on September 17th, 10 days after Giselle's arrest, the moment Michelle's family had feared became reality. Their worst nightmare was confirmed. After 3 agonizing months of searching, the remains of Michelle Liu were discovered in a shallow grave in a remote, rugged area roughly 12 miles from the home of Giselle Esteban. The body had deteriorated to the point of being skeletal, making it impossible for the coroner to determine a specific cause of death. Authorities in California confirmed that the remains found in a San Francisco Bay Area canyon belonged to the missing nursing student who had vanished in May. In September 2012, Giselle Esteban stood trial after entering a plea of not guilty. Though she now admitted to killing Michelle, her defense claimed it had not been premeditated. They argued it was an impulsive act sparked by provocation, an outburst driven by emotion rather than intent. Esteban's legal team attempted to reframe the case as voluntary manslaughter rather than first-degree murder. Throughout the trial, Giselle remained emotionless. She chose not to testify in her own defense and never expressed regret. Observers noted her cold demeanor, sitting motionless and expressionless, avoiding eye contact, showing no reaction to the proceedings or the emotional testimonies of Michelle's family. Some critical details about the encounter remained unclear. It was never definitively proven whether Giselle had waited in the parking garage, knowing Michelle's routine, or if she had lured her there with a message. But prosecutors presented a compelling theory. Giselle, equipped with knowledge of Michelle's schedule, ambushed her and launched a sudden, violent attack, likely using a sharp weapon. This scenario explained the presence of Michelle's blood, the swiftness of the act, and how Giselle was able to place her in the back of the car and drive away unnoticed. The district attorney painted a grim picture of the crime. "What we have here is a sociopath," he said. "This was not a spontaneous outburst. This was calculated, strategic. She struck someone who never saw it coming." The jury found Giselle Esteban guilty of first-degree murder. True to form, she showed no emotion when the verdict was read. She later commented that, had she been on the jury, she would likely have convicted herself as well. The judge, reflecting on decades of experience, described the evidence as among the most damning he had ever seen in a courtroom. Giselle Esteban was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. 2 families had been destroyed, one by senseless violence, the other by the consequences of it. During sentencing, Michelle's family delivered tearful statements. Her only brother, Michael, broke down while speaking about Michelle's dream of becoming a nurse, just like their late mother. Those dreams were cut short in the parking structure of a Bay Area hospital, a life taken by someone consumed by jealousy and false assumptions. Prosecutors explained that Giselle had become convinced, without evidence, that Michelle was trying to steal her boyfriend. That misguided belief ultimately led to murder. Giselle later gave birth to a son while in custody. The baby was placed in the care of his father. Though there were rumors that Scott was the father, he denied this, and the true identity of the child's father has never been revealed. In the wake of Michelle's death, her family turned their grief into purpose, continuing to volunteer with missing persons organizations and raise awareness for other victims. Her brother, Michael, found comfort in the belief that Michelle was now reunited with their mother. He said that thought made things a little less painful, a little less frightening. Case 8. It was a normal Saturday morning in Bethesda, Maryland, when the manager of a Lululemon store showed up to open for the day. But the moment she walked inside, she knew something was wrong. The store was a mess, clothes everywhere, mannequins knocked over, and the floor had blood on it. As she stood there in shock, she heard something, a soft moan coming from the back. What she found next would leave everyone speechless. 2 employees had been inside the store the night before. Now one of them was dead, and the other was tied up and hurt. At first, it seemed like a terrible robbery gone wrong. But as police started asking questions, the story began to change. And what really happened that night was far worse than anyone imagined. Jana Murray entered the world on November 22, 1980, in Wichita, Kansas. She was the daughter of David and Phyllis Rosalind Murray. From a young age, Jana stood out for her adventurous spirit. She had a deep love for animals and dancing, and giving back was part of who she was. She spent much of her life volunteering. Her friends and family often described her as someone whose smile could light up any room. Jana also had an undeniable passion for travel. Her goal was to set foot on every continent, and she managed to visit all of them except Antarctica. For her 30th birthday, she marked the occasion by filming herself bungee jumping, perfectly capturing her thrill-seeking nature. Academically, Jana was a star. Her hard work earned her a scholarship that took her to Madrid, where she spent 2 years studying at St. Louis University. She later completed her Bachelor of Science degree at George Washington University in Washington, D.C. But Jana didn't stop there. She pushed forward and eventually earned dual master's degrees in communication and business administration from Johns Hopkins University. For her master's thesis, she focused on Lululemon Athletica, a premium yoga and fitness apparel brand. Naturally, she pursued a position with the company after graduating, and her drive and business instincts quickly landed her a role. By 2011, Jana was a team leader at the Lululemon store in Bethesda, Maryland. She was also close to finishing her second master's degree. Outside of work and school, Jana was in a happy relationship with her longtime boyfriend, Fraser Bosel. What she didn't know was that Fraser had begun researching engagement rings. He was preparing to propose. Life was falling into place beautifully for Jana. Her career was thriving, her education nearly complete, and her relationship was stronger than ever. A bright future was just around the corner. But everything changed on March 11, 2011. Jana's promising journey was suddenly cut short by a tragic and unimaginable event. The next morning, on March 12th, Rachel, the manager of the Lululemon store, arrived at the Bethesda location shortly before 8 a.m. to open up. Bethesda was generally considered a quiet, safe area, but when Rachel reached the entrance, she noticed the door wasn't locked. That was her first sign something was off. As she stepped inside, it was immediately clear that something terrible had happened. The store was in disarray. Mannequins were knocked over, clothes were scattered, and more horrifyingly, blood was splattered across the floors, walls, and ceiling. Still trying to make sense of the chaos, Rachel suddenly heard faint moaning. Someone was still inside and in pain. Overwhelmed with panic and fear, she ran out of the store and straight to the neighboring Apple store, where a long line of customers had gathered for the release of the new iPad 2. Among the crowd, one man named Ryan couldn't help but notice how distressed Rachel appeared as she stood outside the Lululemon store. When she explained something was terribly wrong inside, Ryan offered to go in with her and check it out. Inside, Ryan walked toward the back of the store, moving past the chaos. Bloody footprints marked the floor, and the space looked like a disaster zone. As he neared the office area, he stumbled upon something unimaginable. A woman with long blonde hair was lying face down in a pool of blood. Before he could fully process the horror, a soft moan caught his attention. It was coming from the bathroom. Inside, he found another woman, her hands and ankles bound with zip ties, her body bloodied, but still alive. It was clear she was injured and in pain, but miraculously she was breathing. Ryan rushed back to the front of the store and told Rachel to call 911 immediately. First responders arrived quickly and were faced with a gruesome scene. They began the task of identifying the two women. Tragically, the deceased was 30-year-old Jana Murray. The survivor, badly hurt but alive, was identified as Brittany Norwood, a 28-year-old employee who had transferred from a Lululemon store in Georgetown just 6 weeks earlier. Brittany's injuries were extensive. Cuts and bruises covered her legs, arms, chest, face, and torso. Zip ties still restrained her, and both women's pants had been slashed, raising disturbing concerns that the attackers may have assaulted them. Brittany was rushed to the local hospital, visibly shaken and in need of immediate care. Back at the store, investigators began examining the body of Jana Murray. The violence inflicted on her defied belief. Medical examiners would later find 331 wounds on her body, over half of which were concentrated on her chest and face. She had been attacked with at least 6 different tools found scattered throughout the store, most of them likely taken from a store toolbox, items including a hammer, a box cutter, a wrench, and a knife. Around her neck was a ligature, though it wasn't tight enough to suggest strangulation. Still, it was an odd and unsettling detail. Jaina's body was transported for an autopsy, while her devastated parents and boyfriend were notified of her death. The autopsy revealed heartbreaking truths. Jaina had fought with everything she had. Her body bore over 100 defensive wounds. Ultimately, the fatal blow had struck the back of her neck. There was evidence that she had tried to escape. The blood trail led toward the store's emergency exit. There was even blood on the door handle, along with a key still in the lock, Jaina's key. The attack had lasted for roughly 20 minutes. The idea that Jaina had endured such agony for so long was almost too much to bear. Detectives urgently needed answers, but they were met with challenges. The Lululemon store had no external security cameras, which meant they had no footage showing who might have entered or exited the store that night. That lack of surveillance was seen as a serious oversight. Investigators turned to the Apple store's security footage across the street and discovered video from the night before that showed two men dressed in dark clothing walking near the store around the time the attack occurred. However, the footage was taken from too far away to make any definitive identification. With no other leads, detectives turned to the only person who might know the truth, Brittany Norwood. Though Brittany was still clearly traumatized, flinching and recoiling from any physical touch, she eventually shared her account of what had happened. According to Brittany, on the evening of March 11, 2011, she and Jaina were on the closing shift. Jaina had driven to work while Brittany took public transit. After locking up the store, they went their separate ways. But shortly after arriving at the metro station, Brittany realized she had left her metro card inside the store. She called another coworker to get Jaina's number and then phoned her directly. Despite having nearly reached home, Jaina turned back to help Brittany. It was just like her to go out of her way for someone else. At around 10:05 p.m., Jaina unlocked the store door with Brittany right behind her. But the moment the door opened, two masked men in dark clothing pushed their way inside. One was tall, the other shorter. Both appeared to be white and in their 20s. She said the shorter man attacked her, while the taller one took hold of Jaina. They forced the women to the back of the store, threatened them, and told Brittany they knew where she lived. She had utility bills in her purse with her address, along with her ID. Terrified, Brittany believed the men were robbers and hoped they would just take what they wanted and leave. But instead, she claimed the situation spiraled into violence. Both women were physically assaulted and taunted with racial slurs. Brittany said they were violated, and during the chaos, she could hear Jaina screaming. Eventually, the screaming stopped. Brittany said that's when she knew Jaina was gone. She feared she was next. But then, unexpectedly, the men told her they would spare her life. Why they chose to leave her alive, she didn't know. When Brittany was asked why the attacker spared her, her answer was chilling. They said she was fun to take advantage of. Once the brutal assault ended, the men allegedly tied Brittany up and left her inside one of the store's bathrooms. That's where she was later discovered. The interview was eventually cut short so investigators could focus on gathering forensic evidence, hoping to find DNA that would lead them to the men responsible. Meanwhile, based on Brittany's account, authorities set up surveillance outside the Lululemon store. Not long after, they spotted two men dressed in black, matching Brittany's description, and stopped them for questioning. But this promising lead quickly unraveled. The men were waiters from a nearby restaurant, and they walked that same path every night after their shifts. The black clothing? Part of their work uniform. Digging into surveillance footage from previous nights, police confirmed that these two men regularly passed by the store at that same time, following the exact route. Both had rock-solid alibis for the night of the crime, and were cooperative with investigators. They willingly provided their DNA and shoe prints for comparison. Everything was sent for analysis, but it all came back clean. On March 16, 2011, 5 days after the incident, Brittany was brought in again for further questioning. When asked if she knew what kind of car Jaina drove, she said she didn't. The interview wrapped up shortly after, but the next day a surprising twist. Brittany's siblings contacted the police and said she had something else to share. They explained that she was afraid to come forward on her own, fearful that the attackers might return and hurt her if she said too much. So, on March 18th, Brittany sat down with detectives for a third interview. This time, she admitted that she actually did know what Jaina's car looked like, because the attackers had made her move it. According to Brittany, The men forced her to drive Jaina's car away from the store before they assaulted her. They told her she was being watched and threatened to kill her if she tried anything or didn't return right away. While moving the car, she noticed a police officer nearby, but didn't approach him, fearing for her life. Yet, despite this explanation, the police began to suspect that Brittany wasn't being fully honest. One major inconsistency involved her earlier claims that both she and Jaina had been sexually assaulted. Their pants had been sliced, seemingly supporting that story. But 6 days into the investigation, forensic testing told a different tale. The results were shocking. There was no evidence of sexual assault. In fact, the only DNA present at the scene belonged to Jaina and Brittany. No trace of any male DNA anywhere. Even the samples from the two waiters didn't match anything at the scene. Investigators turned their attention to another key detail: footprints. Strangely, all the prints were contained inside the store. If the attackers had entered from outside, there would likely have been some kind of trail leading in or out. But there was nothing. That left police with two possible explanations. Either the attackers swapped shoes inside the store, which made little sense, or the attacker never left, because they had never come in from outside. Even more suspicious, the smaller footprints found throughout the scene matched Brittany's shoes. The larger set belonged to a size 14 shoe. At first, this seemed like a potential clue pointing to an unidentified male assailant. But when they matched the print to store inventory, they found the shoes had come from Lululemon's own stockroom. They were store property. This raised a critical question. If two men had ambushed Jaina and Brittany, why would they take the time to change into store-brand shoes during a violent crime? It just didn't add up. Meanwhile, employees at the Apple store next door told police something disturbing. Around 10:30 p.m. on the night of the attack, they had heard a loud argument coming from Lululemon. Several staff members, including a security guard named Ricardo, said they distinctly heard two women fighting. One of them pleading, "Talk to me, please don't do this, what's going on?" The voices were followed by crashing sounds, what sounded like a struggle, and something heavy being dragged across the floor. But no one heard a man's voice. At one point, someone was heard whispering, "God, please help me." Tragically, no one at the Apple store called the police. They dismissed the commotion as a workplace disagreement, some internal drama. Little did they know that Jaina was fighting for her life just a few feet away. With all these discoveries piling up, detectives were growing more and more suspicious of Brittany. As investigators dug deeper into Brittany's background, one particular detail kept popping up, and it was more troubling than they could have imagined. Brittany Norwood had a secret, and it followed her long before she ever stepped foot into the Lululemon store. In college, Brittany had a reputation. Friends, roommates, and even teammates began to notice things disappearing: money, clothes, makeup. When it happened often enough, people started to talk, and eventually, her kleptomaniac tendencies caught up with her. Reports were filed, and as a result, Brittany lost her scholarship and was expelled from school. By 2007, Brittany had relocated to Maryland and started working at a hotel. She quickly rose to a managerial role, but history repeated itself. When coworkers discovered that Brittany had been stealing from them, she was fired. Despite her rocky past, Brittany still had ambitions. She dreamed of becoming a personal trainer and eventually opening her own fitness center. Her job at Lululemon wasn't meant to be permanent. It was supposed to be a stepping stone toward a bigger goal. Jaina Murray and Brittany weren't particularly close. They worked side by side, were friendly enough, but there wasn't much beyond that. Nothing suggested there was bad blood between them. So what triggered the horrifying events of March 11, 2011? That evening, before the store closed, employees went through the standard procedure, a mandatory bag check designed to prevent internal theft. Jaina was tasked with inspecting Brittany's bag, and what she found raised a red flag. A pair of Lululemon leggings with the tag still attached sat inside. Jaina didn't confront Brittany directly, but she contacted their manager and reported the incident. The manager told Jaina she would handle it in the morning. Somehow Brittany found out. Later that night, after the store had closed and the employees had gone home, Brittany contacted Jaina. She claimed she had left her Metro card at the store and needed help retrieving it. Jaina, being the kind and helpful person she was, agreed to return. What happened next is believed to have been a confrontation. Brittany possibly begging Jaina not to report her, hoping to avoid yet another firing. But when Jaina stood firm, refusing to back down, the situation turned volatile. Investigators believe Brittany attacked Jaina with store tools, items like a wrench, a hammer, a box cutter. As Jaina fought desperately to escape, trying to reason with Brittany. The assault escalated to a level of unimaginable brutality. After taking Jaina's life, Brittany moved her car to a different location to buy time and cover her tracks. A witness later reported seeing Brittany in the vehicle, and nearly 90 minutes later, she was still sitting there, possibly formulating the story she would tell next. Brittany returned to the store, put on size 14 shoes found on site, and staged the scene to look like a robbery gone wrong. She trashed the space, took cash from the registers, and then inflicted minor injuries on herself before zip-tying her own wrists and ankles. She placed herself in the bathroom and waited until morning, when coworkers discovered the horrifying scene. All of it a chillingly calculated attempt to divert suspicion. Jaina lost her life over a pair of stolen leggings. On March 18, 2011, exactly 1 week after the crime, Brittany Norwood was arrested. Prosecutors faced a challenge. They had to prove that this wasn't a spontaneous act of violence, but a premeditated murder. If they succeeded, Brittany would receive life without parole. Her defense team, however, aimed for a lesser charge, second-degree murder, arguing that she had snapped in the heat of the moment. The trial began in October 2011. The lead prosecutor, John McCarthy, painted Brittany as a manipulative woman and a compulsive liar. He laid out overwhelming forensic evidence and highlighted the inconsistencies in her story to prove that Brittany had planned the attack. Meanwhile, the defense admitted Brittany had killed Jaina, but argued that it was not pre-planned. They said it was a tragic case of a young woman who panicked and lost control, but the details told a different story. Jaina didn't die quickly. She fought hard, left behind a trail of blood, tried to escape, and endured a 20-minute-long attack. She was conscious through most of it. That kind of prolonged violence made it clear this wasn't impulsive. It was deliberate. The jury didn't need long to reach a decision. After just an hour of deliberation, they found Brittany Norwood guilty of first-degree murder. In January 2012, Brittany was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge called the murder cold-blooded, premeditated, and merciless, and condemned the calculated steps Brittany took after the killing. He also criticized the Apple Store employees for their failure to act when they heard Jaina pleading for help, calling it an example of callous indifference. In 2015, Brittany's final appeal was denied. She remains imprisoned at the Maryland Correctional Institution for Women. This case will be remembered not only for its cruelty, but also for the heartbreaking irony. Jaina was murdered by someone she tried to help. All she did was tell the truth, and for that, she paid the ultimate price.